Good morning. The hearing board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. We're going to just get started with the calendar while we're awaiting our fifth board member. That way we can move the agenda along. Today is Tuesday, November 12th, 2019, and the time is about 9:15 a.m. We are meeting in the hearing board room in Diamond Bar. We have one change to the calendar today, and that is South Coast AQMD versus Climate Industries, Inc., doing business as Howard Industries, case number 6153-2 for a status report and potential modification of the order for abatement is rescheduled to this Thursday, November 14th, 2019, due to illness and agreement of the parties. We have two matters remaining on the calendar to be heard today. And the first one will be Los Angeles County Internal Services Department, case number 6127-3 for a short variance. And are the parties in the room for that? If we can have you just come and just make appearances and to let us know about how long we think. Okay, and who is representing LA County Internal Services Department today?
Good morning. My name is Banaz Tashakorian. I am from County Council for the County of Los Angeles on behalf of the Internal Services Department of the county.
And could you just spell your name for the record?
Sure.
I know we've heard from you before.
Definitely. First name is Banaz, B as in boy, E, H, N as in Nancy, A, Z as in zebra. And last name, T as in Tom, ASHAKORIAN as in Nancy.
Thank you, Ms. Tashakorian. And who is representing the executive officer today?
Good morning, Brian Tomasovic, Senior Deputy District Counsel representing the executive officer.
Okay, and I'll start with you, Ms. Tashakorian. Do you know, well, first of all, we're going to be bifurcating today's hearing. So first we're going to have to, oh, sorry, it's a short variance. We're not bifurcating anything. I was too used to that. How long do you anticipate for your affirmative witnesses and your affirmative testimony and evidence?
So we have two witnesses. I would like to say 30 to 45 minutes.
Okay, so we'll add about 15 for questions at least on that. And Mr. Tomasovic, are you planning to introduce any witnesses today?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, so that first matter will take at least an hour, and I don't know when our fifth board member will be in, so probably no earlier than 10:30 because we will take a break before we start that second matter. And are your witnesses in the room now, Ms. Tashakorian? Okay, so I'm going to ask those witnesses and anyone else who potentially could testify, including any members of the public, if anyone's here to testify, to please rise to be sworn in so we could jump right in. Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay, thank you. And are there any documents that we want to, maybe we can do that and have that?
Definitely. I'm happy to provide those over. Do I-
Yes, now that our fifth and final board member has joined, we will be able to begin, but we will mark all of the documents first. So let's take a moment to do that.
I hope that's okay.
Oh. Okay. There's two of these, or you didn't have a second one? I have one, but I don't have one attached to the side of it. Okay, so that's the one that's science safe. 3519. One's horizontal, one's vertical. The one that's horizontal, we don't have a copy, I don't believe, for the son of it.
I'm going to mark them, but Ms. Tashikorian, before I do that, you wanted to clarify something?
Yes, so I apologize, I don't.
If you, is your microphone on?
I
Yeah.
apologize. I apologize, I don't know if it was labeled, but I just wanted to clarify that the one that is vertical is for oat Nike. So my apologies for not labeling that.
That's helpful for when we mark it. Okay, so the one that's vertical is oat
Nike,
Nike.
and the one that is horizontal is oat mountain.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now my apologies again for,
No, this is good. Okay, so let's mark these if, okay, so let's try to do this in the order in which we received them. So we have a document, one-page document, NetBoss email alarm notification for microwave site emergency generator use, and that one's for oat Nike. That will be Exhibit 1. We received also an alarm report, and that is also for oat Nike. It says oat mountain Nike. Exhibit number 2, that chart. We have another NetBoss email alarm notification for microwave site emergency generator use. That one is for Oat Mountain, and that's a one-pager. Yes. Okay. This is Exhibit 1, but it's the one that's for Oat Nike.
I'll make a suggestion.
Yes?
All these subsequent documents are either to one or the other generator. Should we not group them all together?
I think that will cause mass chaos. I'd rather do it in the order which we received it. We could do that. Okay, I'm hoping. This is one. Okay. Then there's a chart also for Oat Nike, and this one is of the alarm report, and that one will be Exhibit 2. Okay. Then Exhibit 3 will be the Oat Mountain alarm notification email thing. And that one will be Exhibit 3. Then another chart, which is an alarm report. This one is for Oat Mountain microwave site, and that one will be Exhibit number 4. So Exhibit number 4. Okay. We have a proclamation of state of emergency, and that will be Exhibit number 5. We have a color-coded map, and that will be Exhibit number 6. Got it? Okay. Everyone else? Okay. We have the vertical multi-page logbook, which was identified as for Oat Nike, and that will be Exhibit number 7. And then we have the horizontal logbook copies for Oat Mountain, and that will be Exhibit number 8. Okay, we have another chart. This one is Oat Nike. It has across it date, operator, starting hours, ending hours, etc. And so that Oat Nike one will be Exhibit number 9. And then the same chart for Oat Mountain will be Exhibit number 10. And then finally, we received from the district proposed short variance conditions, and we will mark that as Exhibit A as an apple for the district. Okay, and great. And with those preliminaries, and we've already administered the oath, and so Ms. Tashikorian, you may begin with your opening.
thank you very much. My name is again Benaz Tashikorian. I'm with County Counsel for the County of Los Angeles. Here on behalf with our department, the Internal Services Department, part of the County of Los Angeles. We are seeking a variance to exceed the 200 permitted hours for both permits of Oat Nike and Oat Mountain. There are two separate permits under one facility for Oat Mountain. Both these locations provide essential public services for our first responders. They are in the Los Angeles Communications Facility. These generators are owned and operated by the County of Los Angeles. These, during the advisory high winds, the gas company which powers the bottom of the mountain for Oat Mountain and the Southern California Edison, which provides the power on top of the mountain, did power shutoffs due to the high advisory winds, causing the generators to be turned on. The county has taken all efforts to stay informed of these power outages and have stayed in compliance with its permit conditions due to the Saddle Ridge fires that occurred on October 11th, 2019. Power was lost, and these emergency generators were turned on automatically to feed power to the facilities to keep radio communications operation for first responders fighting the fire and evacuating the public that were in danger. This was beyond the reasonable control of the county, and the county is still, at that time, was still in compliance with the permit conditions. And they contacted the AQMD upon realizing that the generators may turn beyond for quite a bit due to the fires to notify them, and then they filed a permit as well as an emergency variance because they foresaw that they would probably exceed the 200 hours. Not allowing the variance will result in disrupting emergency communications between first responders who provide essential public services. And the emergency generators are now on standby and will be, if there's any more power shutoffs due to high advisory winds, they may be turned on. I think that's about it for our opening, and then we're ready to proceed.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Tomasovic for your opening.
Thank you. The district will not have any objections to the exhibits that were offered by the petitioner. We believe that the petition for variance in attaching the petitions demonstrates that they would be in violation of Condition 3 for any additional usage of the two generators. Condition 3 in both permits limits hours to 200 hours in any 1 year. Since both engines are already above that mark, and since that happened due to these outages, the district does not anticipate, or the district will not oppose the granting of the variance, subject to the board's consideration of our proposed conditions in Exhibit A. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tashikorian, you may present your first witness.
Thank you so much. So our first witness will be Ross Galling. Can you please spell your name for the record?
My name is Ross Galang. First name is Ross, R-O-S-S. Last name is Galang, G-A-L-A-N-G.
Thank you. And have you been sworn in by the hearing board?
Yes.
Okay. And what is your title with the County of Los Angeles?
I'm a telecom systems engineer. We take care of the facilities, making sure that they're running 24 hours a day, all year round, in coordination with various ISD groups.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the emergency generators on both Oat Mountain and Oat Nike?
Yes, I am.
And what are these emergency generators used for?
These are used only mainly for backup power, just in case the main power fails. These are used to power on all of the radios on these sites, making sure that the communications equipment are all running for emergency use.
And what do you mean by emergency use? Can you expand on that, please?
Emergency use means for basically for our first responders, fire departments, and sheriffs in time of emergency. In the case this year that we have the Saddle Ridge fire and the high wind incident during the public safety power shutoff incidents.
And both these facilities, I see that they have two separate permits for both Oat Nike and Oat Mountain. They both have two separate ones?
Yes, they have.
Okay. And do you have inspections and maintenance for the maintenance and operations of these generators?
Yes, we diligently do this on a monthly basis. These are being logged on the generator. We have a generator logbook that we kept on site, and making sure that we're compliant whatever the permit conditions allow.
And you mentioned that these emergency generators are used when there's a shut-off. Can you expand on that?
Yes. Basically, these generators are very important with the county, probably as much as all communications equipment. But in this case alone, like these generators, they're just running normally on a day-to-day basis. No, what I mean is during like only for maintenance, but for during emergency that we lost power, we're making sure that these generators are ready whenever we need them to ensure that we can provide power to the sites to ensure that continuous communications for public responder is there for them.
In Southern California, Edison and Gas Company tend to shut the power off when there's high wind advisories.
Yes, they have. As seen on the side of Edison, they provide us an advisory that they'll be shutting off their facility. Also, we go to their website to check to see what areas are affected within the county, making sure that we're ready to ensure that the needs for first responder is met.
And is there any other types of alert systems that you would have that would let you know that there is a power shutoff happening?
Right now, we have our communications network operations system where it sends out like an alarm. In my case, I receive one of those email notification. I can receive them on my computer. I can receive them on my cell phone whenever I'm out of the office. Basically, like it's just notifying me that the generator has engaged, meaning that it run, meaning that the commercial power has failed. And then after that, like it gives us some notification that if the generator still run for a certain period of time, and then we receive a final notification when the generator is when the main power is already when the power is transferred to the main power of the generator.
And for the board's reference, that is Exhibit 1 and 3. That is the NetBoss email alarm notification that is received by the Internal Services Department when there is a power shutoff that does go off. Can you go through and just give them a little bit more information about that, just so they have more?
Yeah, basically that report alone is giving us an idea, like if the generator is activated, meaning that when the commercial power is transferred to the emergency power, meaning to the generator. This report also gave us information about like how many hours that the generator runs. Basically, like on this notification, we have the start time and the end time, or even like date, basically if it's running for more than a day. Meaning on my part as a facility engineer or telecoms engineer, I can actually like know like how much runtime hours does the generator run from start of the year to the current. Meaning that I have like a system like that I just input the data where I will know like how much hours do I have today basically. That's with this alone. That's why I use it as a tool to calculate the runtime hour. That's why I ended up consolidating everything and then able to ask South Coast AQMD or to actually like start the filing for variance, meaning that because of this unforeseen event that I'm seeing that we have, like for example, those fire incident and plus the upcoming high wind incident. This data gave us that we're gonna be exceeding the allowable limit for our permit conditions.
And when was it that the Saddle Ridge fires occurred? Is it October 11th?
Yes.
And when you received that, is that when you got the NetBus alert too, that it was going to be turned off?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And Exhibit 1 and 3 are the actual email notifications. 2 and 4 are a report that's just generated to calculate the hours that the generator ran. Apologies. I'm now introducing exhibit number 5, which is the Executive Office Proclamation of State of Emergency due to the Saddle Ridge fires. These areas for the Oat Mountain, Oat Nike, are they high-risk areas as defined by the CPUC?
Yes, they are. They are categorized as tier 3 in terms of fire hazard areas.
And what level is it?
That means that basically, like, they just categorize everything in terms of location within the county. This one falls on a high-risk fire incident.
Thank you. That would be exhibit number 6, which is defining this area as a level 3 extreme risk area. When did you first receive notification that there would be a potential that you would exceed the 200 hours for these 2 generator sites?
Actually, what when we calculated our current runtime hours a month ago, we were about around like 100, below like 120 hours back then. And then since the fire is still there at the time being, we don't know like when our generators gonna stop running. And then after that, we look at the forecast at the same time that there's gonna be like another Santa Ana winds coming like in a week or so, something like that. I think that was October 15th that I contacted South Coast AQMD about the condition of our generators. Although we were not violating it, but the thing is because of unforeseen event that we think that we will be exceeding those, we will be violating those permit conditions. That's why after when we called them, and then we asked for guidance on what document that we need to apply for, and then they gave us guidance. I think that was Teresa Barrera who gave me like a guidance in order to file for the petition. And then I think we filed the actual petition after a week because we still have to take care of like internal processes within the county, including like the payment procedure and everything. And then after that, I think that was on the 20th, but we officially submitted all of the initial documentation required for the petition.
Thank you. When was the power restored on these 2 generators? More or less, if you recall.
The power restored, I think, on November 1st.
Okay.
Yeah, that time we already exceeded the 200 hours.
If another power outage occurs before the end of the year, what harm will the county suffer if not permitted to utilize the backup generators?
Basically, it's more of a public safety issue we have here. If we don't, if in case another power outage comes in, and then if these sites are out, basically, we're taking out almost the whole northwest area communication of the whole county, basically, for our first responders.
Will the county continue to monitor the portable emergency generators?
Yes.
If the variance is granted during the period the variance is in effect, will the county take steps to reduce excess emissions to the maximum extent feasible?
Yes.
And during this time variance is in effect, if requested, will you report the emission levels to the district pursuant to a schedule established by the district?
Yeah.
Okay. I have no more further questions for Mr. Galang.
Thank you. Mr. Tomasovic, any questions for Mr. Galang?
No questions, Madam Chair.
I had just a couple of questions. One you might be able to answer, and one you might not be the right witness, so just let me know. The first one is for the Nike generator. I'm looking at exhibit number 2, and it shows that the hours total are at 191. Are they now over 200? Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, they are over.
And when did they go over 200?
Around October 30th.
Okay, so I'm not reading this correctly. The runtime hours on the last on the last column, the total at the end says 191, and that is dated as of the 4th of November. So is that correct? On Exhibit 2?
Exhibit 2. Okay. The 191.25 on this documentation only represents from the months from October 1 to November 4.
Oh, I see.
It doesn't cover the whole
Just
year.
during that period of
Yeah.
time? And so it went over 200?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, when the inspector came into the site on October 30th, we're already around like 190. He was telling me that since the generators are running, you're going to be exceeding the 200 hours on that same day. That's
Okay.
why I mentioned that October 30th has the landmark for the 200.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies that. And then I had a question with regard to excess emissions. Would that be you, or would that be the other witness?
It would be either one.
The question is, that they seem really high, but I know it shouldn't be. And so I'm looking, for example, I was looking at the ex parte minute order, which said 29 pounds per day of NOx. And if any excess emissions would be based on the generator's emissions profile per hour, in pounds per hour, for any hour that it's run above 200 hours. Can you just quickly go over how you calculated those excess emissions? Because, again, it just seemed high. Yes, and also on page 7, item number 19 of the petition.
I forget the standard document.
I just want to be accurate for our weighing and balancing in our findings. And again, I haven't seen a generator with emissions that high, so it doesn't seem that is correct.
Okay.
Do you have, for example, with you, Mr. Galang, the emissions profile for these generators? Okay,
He has a petition before him right now.
okay.
Okay. We just used this formula, and then what we did was on the original petition, like number 20, I just based the calculation based on the amount of fuel being used by the generator.
And do you know if the district, anyone on district staff looked at those calculations, or
I'm not sure.
you're not sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Actually, this is the same calculations that we did last year, because this same site was we had this same session before at Oat Mountain, and then basically like we just used the same calculation as the previous year, and
Okay.
since it's still using the same amount of fuel.
And it's based on a 24-hour day, is that the pounds per day?
Yes, 48 gallons a day.
And that's on a 24-hour day?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions. Additional, Mr. Balagopalan?
Yeah, Mr. Galang, yeah, I remember you were here last year.
Yeah.
So what system did you put in place for the notification? What's that called? The SCADA or the GPS or?
We have a NetBoss, we call it a NetBoss system.
Okay.
It's basically being used for all, for the whole communication systems itself, meaning that it gives alarms for everything, including when there's a problem on the radio, if there's a problem on our backhoe, like our microwave dish, if there's a problem with the generator running, at the same time, it also gives an alarm if there's a commercial power failure. Aside from that one is on our main operations here, they have like a big screen out there that they can see all of the alarms being generated in the network in terms of, they are categorized in terms of criticality. For example, if it's a main power failure, it's going to have a higher priority alarm, basically.
And there's a threshold that you have which triggers you to submit for a variance when it exceeds, in this case, 190 hours or something? Is that?
Right now, it doesn't have that capability. What I have is basically like as an engineer who's actually in the county in my group, I'm assigned to monitor the maintenance of like this generator. Meaning, Paul is actually doing the maintenance, but we're doing it like in collaboration with them. On my part is he can track the record using the logbook, but since we made an improvement because I wasn't included on those email notifications before, and now as an improvement that we promised the board that we have to be diligent in how we monitor our hours. Now I was able to get those notifications. I was added to it. And right now, on a day-to-day basis, even on my cell phone and everything, and then I put up like an Excel sheet, like it has all of the days in a year, and then I'm just gonna put like how many hours that it's run on this particular day in time, and then it's just calculate how many hours it is on a year-to-date basis. That's why I ended up like, as of today, because we have a fire right now. I'm already at 100. That's why I set up a trigger that whenever I reach at least half of the allowable limit on the permit condition, that I have to inform AQMD already. Although sometimes that our process is taking a little bit longer in terms of actually filing, but just want to make to inform the board that we're trying to inform you that we're gonna, due to this emergency, we're gonna be possibly exceeding this limit.
I just had one, and you might not be the right person. It says on the petitioner a Title V facility. So besides these two generators, do you have other pieces of equipment at the facility? I mean, to trigger, do you know what a Title V facility is, or?
Not.
No, okay, that's okay then. I just, I'm just curious as to what other equipment you have that, because you're asking relief from 3002, which is a Title V permit condition. So you don't know if, besides the two generators in a sort of a remote area, and are they associated other equipment at the facility in that area? Do you know?
No, only for the county.
Only, okay.
Only for county use, that's it.
How far apart are the two generators between Nike and Old Mountain?
About 1.5 miles.
Oh, they're 1.5 miles apart?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just in the same mountain ranges.
okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? I just had a question again on excess emissions. These are diesel generators, correct?
Yes, they are.
So wouldn't there be excess emissions on particulate matter? I don't see that represented.
Yeah. Sorry, yes, NVOC. So, I'm sorry, I meant to ask that.
No, no,
So
go
the
ahead, please.
basis for your emission factor was not listed. You're using the fuel usage, which is fine, but do you know where that source of that emission factor came from? Is it published, from the manufacturer or from another document? Do you know the emission factor?
I cannot recall because our safety officer helped me out, calculated these parameters, and I'm not sure like which documentation he got the formula.
And you're right, both PM and VOC is not listed there. So it's only the three pollutants, So, but you don't know where the source of the emission factors are from.
No, sorry.
Thank you.
Any other, any other questions for Mr. Galang? Thank you, Mr. Galang. Ms. Tashakorian, do you have another witness you wish to?
Yes, we have
Present.
one more witness, Mr. Paul Ortiz. Mr. Ortiz, can you please spell your name?
Yes, my first name is Paul, P-A-U-L. Last name Ortiz, O-R-T as in Tom, I, and Z as in zebra.
Have you been sworn in by the hearing board?
Yes, I have.
What is your title with the County of Los Angeles?
Electrical supervisor.
And what are your duties as an electrical supervisor?
My main duties is I have a crew of 7 electricians, 3 electromechanics, which maintain the generators at these sites, and 1 electrical helper. I dispatch service calls to my men, process POs, validate purchases, and other paperwork for the office.
Are you familiar with the emergency generators at the Oat Mountain and Oat Nike location?
Yes, I am.
And how often are these 2 sites tested?
Each of our sites are tested on a monthly basis.
And have they been tested on a monthly basis for the year 2019?
Yes, they both have.
And who does the testing of the generators?
We have 1 electromechanic that is assigned to these sites, but I do rotate other electromechanics if he is off for vacation or sick so that we can stay in compliance.
And are all these electric mechanics and electricians county employees?
Yes, they all are.
Great. And what does the testing consist of when they do go onto the sites?
Our monthly testing consists of checking the belts, the hoses, check the coolant level, oil, check for any signs of leaks, check the hours to see if it's ran since the last time it was ran. We'll run it approximately 20 minutes, listen to the engine, make sure it's running properly, putting out the proper voltage, proper frequency, and then we end up logging the logbook.
And what is this logbook? Can you provide more information about it?
The logbook is a book that is left on site where we log in all activities that we do with the generator.
And for the board's notice, this is exhibits 7 and 8. 7 would be for the Oat Nike site. 8 is for the Oat Mountain site. Can you go through these 2 logins just to give them more clarification of these books?
Okay, so in these books, it is written down by month. Usually we start off with a date. We'll do starting hours, ending hours. We've added, hopefully they remember properly, to put year-to-date hours so that it's in our faces, kind of to remind us where we at with these hours for the year. A little description of what they checked. Like here on these, they write down, like I said, the voltage, the frequency, oil pressure, temperature, battery voltage, and approximately how long they ran it. And they'll note that if it's ran since their last visit, how many hours did it run.
And in addition to these logbooks, you also maintain a table?
Yes, we also have an electronic file that we provide to our customers to show that we were there. It lists also the starting hours, the ending hours. It's a checklist that the mechanics checked off certain stuff, and they can make notes on there like the battery was dead, I replaced the battery, or it was low on oil, I added some oil, so that we can provide that to our customers so they could see that we did make our monthly visit.
But in addition to that, you also have the exhibits 9 and 10, which are the starting hours, the ending hours, the maintenance, and power outages and such, correct?
Correct. That was suggested by the AQMD supervisor that inspected us last year. He had advised me to kind of present it this way. This is what he would have liked to see. So in accordance with his request, we provided that again for you this year.
And going through exhibits 9 and 10, can you give us, explain that table to us by the color coding, which is the gold, the pink, the blue, and then the dark pink?
Sure. So everything in white is our monthly testing. We noted the date, the person that did the testing, starting hours, ending hours, and then under M&T, which is maintenance and testing, how long did we run the unit, and then the reason, they'll say monthly testing. Everything in gold was a planned power outage beyond our control. That's when Edison decided to do some maintenance, or the gas company decided to do some maintenance and they shut down the grid so they could do their repairs or maintenance. When we get a little bit further down into the pink, that is when the saddle fire took in effect and we lost power to the site. So those hours in pink are due to the Saddle Ridge fire. Right below that in white, you'll see when Ross contacted the AQMD to let them know that we'd be filing for a petition. Then we get right into the blue, which is PSPS events. That's when Edison will shut down the power, when they felt the winds were too high. And then when you get to the bottom in dark red is approximately when we fell out of compliance and exceeded our 200 hours for the year.
So when was your last visit to these two locations?
I personally went there last night.
Okay, and for Oat Mountain, what is the total, that's Exhibit 10? The total hours are,
Okay, total hours for maintenance are 4. Due to power outages is 295.9. Year-to-date total hours are 314.8.
and then 314 of that, how many hours are for maintenance and testing hours?
Maintenance and testing was only 4.
And then now looking at Exhibit 9 for Oat Nike, total hours are for that location?
For that location, we have a total of maintenance and testing hours of 5.3. Due to power outages beyond our control, 235.3. Year-to-date currently is 240.6.
Okay. And for the permit, how many hours are permitted for maintenance and testing?
We are allowed 20 hours per year.
Okay. So we are in compliance with that maintenance and testing for both sites?
That is correct.
Okay. Are the emergency generators still being used?
They are currently still in auto, ready to be used if we lose power to either one of the facilities.
Will the county continue to monitor these emergency generators?
Yes, we will continue to inspect these generators on a monthly basis, or if they start up and run due to PSPS events, we will again go out there and take a look to make sure everything is fine.
And when you went there on November 1st, 2019, they were not running, the emergency generators? Or were they?
According to November 1st, that was a report from the NetBoss system that said that our power was restored. I was the last person to go out there last night, so there was no one between November 1st and last night.
Okay. I have no further questions unless the board or.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?
Mr. Tomasovic, do you have any questions for Mr. Ortiz?
No.
Board members, any questions for Mr. Ortiz? Mr. Balagopalan?
Mr. Ortiz, if I recollect from the last time you were here, I think and there was, there was delay between when when the individual goes to do the testing and logging, and when it gets when it get communicated to you, 3-4 days sometimes, depending on when it goes. That system has been improved.
We actually have developed an online through SharePoint system. It's an Excel spreadsheet that the guys can access while on site. Sometimes it's a little sketchy because these are communication sites, so they do lose data communication as well as cell signal. So sometimes they have to come down off the hills, find somewhere that has county Wi-Fi to do those reports. But they now have it electronically that when it's done, it's uploaded automatically. I don't have to wait for them to hand deliver me a piece of paper.
Okay, that's great to hear. So, and in your spreadsheet, it sort of it gives you a running total, so you know when it's close to 200 or what the. So what happens? I know that if I recollect, also there was miscommunication between the department. So do you inform Mr. Galang now? Hey, look, we may have an issue, and he's the one responsible for filing the petition, or?
On our new spreadsheet, there's also a column that shows year-to-date hours,
Right.
which Excel calculates automatically to not rely on our poor math. And when that report is uploaded, Mr. Galan gets an email notification that there is a new report ready for him to view or download at his need. So I don't have to inform him, my staff don't have to inform him. He automatically gets a notification that there's a new report for his viewing or for his downloading.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Mr. Ortiz? Senator?
On Oak Nile and Oak Mountain, two different ones, right?
Correct. Those are two different facilities, about a mile and a half apart from each other.
And these logs that you, with these various exhibits, have you given those log data to the district, AQMD? or are they just being available?
The logbooks are available at the site for anyone to view.
To your knowledge, have they visited the site since the fire to determine whether or not these logs are in fact there?
Yes, we did have a visit from the AQMD on October 30th. The inspector went up there with our mechanic Ken and Mr. Ross over here to inspect both sites, which the inspector did inspect the logbooks at that time.
And everything was in order?
The inspector did not say there was any problems. He said everything looked good to him.
Okay. On your log data, do you indicate at all how much time, if any, you use for batteries?
As in, what do you mean for
In order to
battery?
reduce the emission level, sometimes you switch from diesel to battery.
The sites don't have a battery backup. They do have,
See that in your petition?
we have,
We have that kind of option, but for this time, we didn't switch onto the battery because we need to preserve the batteries as much as possible.
Do you ever use it?
Yes, we also use the battery just in case the main power, everything, like the main power and the generator fails, that's the only time that the batteries are going to be.
In the petition, you say, what would you do in order to reduce emission during the time the variance is in effect? And you say, we'll use the battery and switch back and forth.
if I may, the batteries that we do have at the site are UPS batteries that cover certain equipment. It doesn't cover all the radio equipment. We have some radios, some microwave links that run off of UPS because they actually run off of DC. But not all the equipment has battery potential. So if we had to turn off the generator, we would lose some equipment because some equipment only runs on AC, but there's still some equipment that would run because they're DC voltage operated, and that is the battery plant that we have on site. So the battery plant doesn't really do the full site. It does certain the more critical equipment, I would have to say, is on the UPS.
That was not explained in the petition.
Okay.
Problem.
Well, it's being explained now, which
I understand.
not a
Please, ma'am. I'd say it was not explained in the petition. He is explaining it now. But that's the reason why I raised the question, because it was not explained in the petition. It gave him an opportunity to explain it.
Yes, I'm thinking the person who wrote the petition may not understand how the site is actually operated. Not everyone does. Even my staff don't know as much of the site as I do. They could not walk in there and tell you that radio's for sheriffs, that is critical. This one's for heliport. I worked more with the technicians, so I actually know more about the sites than anyone in my staff. I don't know if I actually know more than Ross, because he's actually a designer, but like I'm trying to say, not everyone actually knows how these sites actually operate, except for maybe the radio techs who work on it day to day.
I see. All right, I lost my thought. Sorry about that.
Ms. Verdugo Peralta has a question, and then perhaps, Senator, you'll have your question in mind.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For one, I actually really like the spreadsheets because I know that we're going to have a lot of companies coming before us due to the outages, and then I don't think they're going to be this explicit. We could actually take a look at it and really know what's happening and how you're getting to your 200 hours. That being said, at the beginning of the testimony, or actually I should say opening remarks, your attorney mentioned that it was not only SCE but also the gas company that is involved. Can you explain that part of it, please?
Okay, so Oak Mountain is actually on the gas company's property. They control the transmission lines because it feeds various equipment on their hill. We are the end user of their transmission lines. So even if Edison leaves their lines activated down below, the gas company at any time could shut them off. If they had a gas leak like they did a few years ago, they could shut down the power at their will, which in turn affects us because we are relying on their transmission lines.
Thank you.
Senator, do you recall your question?
Really simple, like, in the petition, it said that exceeding the 200 hours was likely to occur. Has it occurred at this point in time?
Yes, it has, sir.
Okay, so today you just simply asking for a variance to allow for the excess number of hours that's been used so far
And hopefully for the rest of the year, because
for the rest of the year.
Let me just correct, because starting today would be, they are under ex parte relief, but the short variance would begin today, so it's not retroactive.
Right. So and we know why the Saddle Ridge fires is what caused it, correct?
correct.
What's it, I don't understand, other than the fact we know the cause of it. We know you keep good records. Your logs are in place. You understand the technology and what you'll be doing the variance in order to reduce emission. I think we go forward, don't we?
I would hope so.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I know that Mr. Balagopalan still has a question as to whether the facility is in fact a Title V. Ms. Tasha Corian, do you know that answer?
I do not, but I'm hoping.
What is a Title V?
And perhaps Mr. Tomasovic has information on that?
Well, I was curious where the question drew from, but I believe perhaps you have the notice of hearing had referenced Rules 203 and Rule 3002, and maybe that was an abundance of caution, gap-filling measure done by the clerk, because when I
Well,
look at
the petition itself does check yes as to Title V permit on the first page.
Oh, on the first page, okay. I had not seen that, but I had seen that in terms of citing the rules which you seek relief from, which was item 9, page 4 of 12, that had just cited the permit condition number 3. Just with reference to like the fine directory, I don't see that these are Title V facilities, and looking at the faces of the permits, I don't see that it's a Title V facility, so I would think.
And 203B would be sufficient?
I would think Title V permit was marked in error, and that 203B is the one appropriate rule for variance relief.
Thank you for that. Mr. Balagopalan.
I think we heard testimony also that the engines are a mile and a half apart. Typically, they don't get lumped into one facility ID. They should have their own individual ID. I think they list in the permit both as Old Mountain, but it looks like one is Old Nike and one is Old Mountain, which are two distinct areas, and maybe that was not communicated the permit engineer properly, So that's something to look at.
The same facility ID is indicative of
The location, the site, so.
Right.
Unless they're contiguous, then they can be lumped together, but if they are a mile and a half apart, they typically should get their own facility ID and so forth.
And let me just make sure with either witness answering the question, but on the first page of the petition, the facility address of Oat Mountain, is that correct? In Chatsworth, is that correct for both facilities? Both generators?
Both generators are situated in the Oat Mountain range, basically.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if we were to identify each one as the address listed on the petition of Oat Mountain, Chatsworth 91311, that would be correct for both generators? That's the first page of the petition on the top.
Yeah, this location is basically for both generators.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kellings, so you know Old Nike and Old Mountain, that's a mile and a half apart, right? And that's what you said?
Yes.
So the operators and Mr. Ortiz also knows that. And so it's identified separately in your system or somewhere. This is actually Old Mountain, and this one is Old Nike, and they know which one they're servicing, right?
Yes.
So they're in the same mountain range, but physically they are a mile and a half apart.
Yes, they are.
And they probably don't, because they don't have a street address, so it's probably all categorized as Old Mountain. Is that
Yes.
how you do it? Yeah. I just was trying to point out that the district may want to look at it and see about, whether there needs to be broken up, because typically one site, one location is given its own facility ID, But for this petition, I think, that's how it is issued, so it should be all right.
I think it's fine, but a good suggestion for future. Are there any other questions for either witness? Ms. Verdugo-Peralta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. along those lines that Mr. Gallopon just brought up, do you have the two sites, are they separate metering through SoCal Edison? Because if they're separate metering, they normally will have two addresses.
Yeah, they have two separate meter.
So along your request, we may want to look at it that way, because if they're identifying it as two separate addresses, that might be another way to look at it.
And I think that it's not quite relevant for what we're doing today, as long as we can identify them, and we can identify them by their permit. They each have two different permits and two different permit numbers.
The permit number both said Old Mountain, when one should say Old Nike and the other one Old Mountain, but that can be corrected, for the future. I mean.
Thank you. Senator, you had a question?
There are 5 members of the Board of Supervisors. Previously, and I don't know if it's the case today, each supervisor has jurisdiction in terms of hands-on supervision of various departments. For the Internal Service Department, who's the supervisor, hands-on with that department?
We actually worked with all 5 of the supervisors.
No, not one has
No.
the sole responsibility?
No. Part of what our electricians do is also we provide their security. So we do work with each one of the board members except for Kuehl. But we do have a working relationship with each of the supervisors. I don't believe we actually report to just one. We report to all.
Well, each department serves them all in terms of having hands-on responsibility for the daily operations. That's okay, you don't have it. Thank you.
Okay, board members, any other questions on the 6 findings? Okay, thank you. I had 2 questions, Ms. Tashikorian. First of all, the exhibits 1 through 10, would you like them in evidence?
Yes, please.
Okay, and I believe, Mr. Tomasovic, you indicated you have no objection.
No
is that
objection.
correct? Okay, so all 10 of the numbered exhibits 1 through 10 are now in evidence.
Thank you.
The other question I had is whether, I know you, as Exhibit 5, I believe it is, you, yes, you gave us the proclamation of a state of emergency, and also there's an asterisk in the proposed conditions with regard to a waiver, a request of a waiver for fees. Are you requesting a waiver under?
Yes.
I believe it's 303P.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so we will handle that separately. First, we'll just make the motion on the, we'll have deliberation and make a motion on the actual short variance, and then we'll handle the fees. But
Thank you very much.
okay, so I'm going to ask if there's any member of the public who is present who wishes to be heard today. And I see none. So Ms. Tashikorian, your closing statement.
Thank you very much. You've heard testimony from our 2 county Internal Services Department employees, Mr. Ortiz and Mr. Galan, about seeking a variance for both the Oat Mountain and the Oat Nike emergency generators that have now exceeded the 200 permitted hours. These are both, again, located in the Los Angeles Communications Facility, and they provide essential public services and are used by first responders such as firefighters, sheriff, and county departments for emergency communications, especially when there are fires occurring within the areas. During the Saddle Ridge fire, as well as times when there have been high advisory winds, the gas company and Southern California Edison had turned off the power for these sites, causing the generators to be turned on. The county has taken all steps to be informed of the power outages. As you've heard testimony from both Mr. Galang and Mr. Ortiz, they have, since last year, taken steps to make sure and be assured that if there's any potential of it going over hours, or as well as receiving notifications when there are power outages, they do both get alerted, stay in communication with each other, and make sure that they do not exceed the 200 hours. As you heard, they did come before the AQMD when they were about 120 hours, 121 hours for both sites to seek a variance for those two sites because they wanted to take all reasonable steps as they were aware that the Saddle Ridge fire was occurring and that these generators were going to be will be utilized. Not allowing the variance will result in a disruption of emergency communications between first responders who provide essential public services. And these generators are now on standby position if there's any future shut-off powers by either gas company and or Southern California Edison. So that is our closing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tomasovic, your closing.
Based on the evidence in the petition and the evidence presented today, the district does not oppose the granting of the variance. Just a note on excess emissions. It's understood by an eyeball test, those look like high numbers. I unfortunately don't have any contrary information to present and would hope that the numbers turn out lower. It is appropriate to do worst-case assumptions with excess emissions. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Board members, I believe the findings can be made. As we are aware, both of these generators are already under ex parte variance relief. And as was stated in Ms. Tashikorian's closing, these generators were first brought quickly, even though they were not quite close to the 200 hours, given everything that was happening with the fire and the high wind warnings. And I think that that the county acted very quickly, although that's not as relevant. Really, today, all we're looking at is whether or not to extend that variance relief in a short variance lasting through the end of the year until those hours can be reset on both of the generators. And we have heard testimony and seen documents today that show that both now are over 200 hours. So our finding number one is easily made. They are both in violation of their permit condition number 3, which limits total hours to 200 for each generator. Certainly, we can make the finding that this is due to the conditions beyond reasonable control of the petitioner in terms of the fires that were the Saddle Ridge fire that started on October 11th. We've seen the proclamation of state of emergency from the state in terms of the high wind advisories. Both of these are in red flag areas, and the power was cut to both of these locations multiple times, resulting in the over 200 hours. If we were not to grant variance today, there would be an unreasonable taking of property in terms of any penalties and et cetera that would occur from violations of using these generators. And of course, we should go back to the fact of what these generators are used for. They're used for 911 and emergency communications in remote areas, and were in fact used during the Saddle Ridge fire for police and firefighting, which also makes this an essential public service, which I don't think we need to invoke in terms of making the findings, but we should say, for the record, this is an essential public service because it is run by the county, and it impacts unreasonably, would impact on firefighting services and police services. I also can make the finding that any taking in terms of not being able to use these generators or having fines for these generators would be without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. There's a question as to whether the excess emissions are correct. They seem high, however, they may not be because they're based on 24 hours of usage, and we would only be seeing excess emissions for the hours that they're actually used, that these generators are used above 200 hours, and in that instance, it would be an emergency, and so I can make that finding. Consideration to curtailing operations would not you can't curtail these without, and in lieu of obtaining a variance, because these generators need to be used in terms of, in case of emergency. And they do need to be used monthly in terms of maintenance, so curtailment's not really an option. Excess emissions, reducing them to the maximum extent feasible. The only thing they can do is just be on top of when those generators are turned on, turned off, and they seem to have really gotten those processes together, and there's really no other way to reduce excess emissions. And, well, we said they're also using battery packs, but that cannot be used for everything, and not for these, for this purpose. And finally, monitoring will be part of the conditions, and they are clearly doing a good job of monitoring in any event. Any other thoughts on the findings? Mr. Balagopalan?
I was going to add, when you said good job, I think they've done a excellent job since we heard the last time they were here in tracking the hours and communicating between the departments. So I applaud the efforts they've undertaken, to get timely data and also notification when exceedance are occurring, and with the NetBoss and the Excel reporting system they have in place. So that's good to hear.
Any other thoughts? Senator?
It's essential for the first responders to have a line of communication. And so when the fire happened, and we needed to communicate for the public safety, it was necessary that we put this equipment in operation. There are other reasons why we should approve the variance. Those are conditions, standard procedure, boilerplate reasons, but the main reason to me, public safety. We needed to be able to communicate to protect the public from any other hazardous situation that might occur. And the conditions that have been submitted, you can report your operation to the district periodically, and that's keeping hands-on watch of what's happening out there from this day going forward. So I think that's a good idea as well. So I think that you're on target. Your report was very convincing, to me at least, and other members of the board. And the need, it was there. So good luck.
Thank you, well stated. Any other thoughts? Okay, did you, Dr. Mercer? No. Okay, then I'm going to make a motion in the matter of Los Angeles County Internal Services Department, case number 6127-3. I move that we grant short variance beginning today and ending, going through December 31st, 2019, as the hours on both these generators will reset as of January 1st. I further, this is for the equipment. There are two generators. One is designated as Oat Mountain. The other is designated as Oat Mountain Nike. They are both on Oat Mountain in Chatsworth with the zip code of 91311. They are indicated on page 3 of the petition, item number 6. Each one has a different permit number, so it is for those two permit numbers, those two generators. And the variance will be from 203B only, since we have established it's not a Title V facility, so 3002C1 is not necessary. And both of those generators, it's condition 3 of their respective permits with regard to the exceedance of the 200 allowable hours for each. And I further move that we incorporate the short variance conditions in Exhibit A. And the excess emissions are to be determined, and they will be based, they are, what we see as estimated is for every 24-hour period that they might be run, it's 1,075.2 pounds per day of CO2, 29 pounds per day of NOx, and I think it's 191 pounds per day of SO2. There will also be VOCs and particulate matter, but essentially it will be to be determined based on how many hours it is run and the emissions profile for each of the generators. And that completes my motion. Is there a second? Second. Dr. Bernstein seconds the motion. Is there a discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Verdugo-Peralta, how do you vote?
Aye.
How do you vote, Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes.
Senator, how do you vote? And Dr. Bernstein, you vote?
Aye.
I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0. We also have a request under Rule 303, District Rule 303P, and board members, we should all be familiar with this one at this point, unfortunately, given all of the fires in our area over the last few years. I'll just read it. 303P, waiver of fees, states all fees associated with this rule, and this rule is stating all fees, including emissions fees, shall be waived, so it's not discretionary, shall be waived for any petition for a variance filed as a direct and proximate result of any event declared to be a state of emergency by local, state, or federal authorities. And board members, we have received exhibit number 5, which is State of California Executive Department proclamation of state of emergency. And if we look in the whereas clauses, in particular wind events, the first whereas clause states beginning on October 7, 2019, a significant wind event struck California resulting in nearly statewide red flag warnings. The second one, whereas clause, specifically mentions the Saddle Ridge fire. A few down says, whereas erratic winds, high temperatures, and dry conditions have further increased the spread of these fires. And as we heard today, the 2 generators at issues went over the 200 hours due to high wind conditions and being in the red flag areas. And so I would say that is a direct and proximate, direct and proximate result of an event declared to be a state of emergency by the state. Any other thoughts on that? Mr. Balagopalan?
I agree. I think the governor's declaration proclamation and clearly states it's the Saddle Ridge fire, and we know these events occurred due to the Saddle Ridge fire, so I think we should waive the fees.
Any other thoughts? Okay. Ms. Senator.
The county will have a lot of money. They hit me for 40,000. You don't need consideration.
Sorry? I'm
sorry? They have a lot of money. The tax bill went up.
Right, but we're not dealing with discretionary waiver. We're dealing with a waiver due to a state of emergency, so we don't have discretion to weigh.
I understand. I'm just smiling at them.
Any other thoughts? Okay, then I'm going to make a motion on that as well. In the matter of Los Angeles County Internal Services Department, case number 6127-3, I move that we waive fees as required, waive excess emission fees as is required under Rule 303P due to state of emergency that was declared, and this violation of the rules in terms of permit condition number 3, going over 200 hours, being a direct and proximate result of that state of emergency. Is there a second?
Yes.
Mr. Balagopalan seconds that motion. Is there any discussion on that motion? Senator, how do you vote? Aye. Dr. Bernstein, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Verdugo-Peralta, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Balagopalan, how do you vote?
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, and thank you for a very clear presentation today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Have a great day.
And good luck, and hopefully we'll have no more of that. Let's take our 15-minute morning break before we call the next case, the next matter, and we'll come back at 10 of. So at 10:50, we'll come back on the record. We are off the record. We are back on the record. We're going to take up our second matter for today, and that is Johnson Controls, Inc., case number 6158-1 for an interim product variance. And who is representing Johnson Controls today?
Good morning, this is Alan.
If you can make sure you turn on your microphone, the light should be on.
There.
And then just bring it
Is that
close to
better?
it. That's
Yeah.
much better.
This is Alan Stern, Beverage and Diamond, representing Johnson Controls.
Okay, and your last name is spelled S-T-E-R-N?
S-T-E-R-N, and my first is A-L-L-Y-N.
Thank you. And who's representing the executive officer today?
Mary Reichert on behalf of the executive officer.
Surprise, surprise. Okay. Before we begin, this board has heard 3 other matters that are very related or very similar. And my question is, first, did you view those hearings?
Yes, I watched about 18 hours of board webcast, and so thank you for doing those webcasts. That's excellent.
Not us, but we'll take it.
So we could incorporate by reference those hearings and limit our discussion today to diligence, and then we do have a little bit of additional information on adverse impact that we would probably like to discuss.
Okay, so you are willing to incorporate the evidence and testimony that we heard on all of the related findings we need to make? Okay, thank you very much. And there's no objection, I take. Okay, and I know that there was also, and maybe if you have firsthand knowledge of it, or the district does, I understand that there are efforts by the district governing board to try and not make an interim measure of this, but instead to correct the issue in early December. So any evidence or testimony we can have on that would be very helpful as well. So we're going to bifurcate the hearing today, and as you indicated, Ms. Stern, we're going to first need to make the findings of good cause, and most of those items can be made based on what we've now incorporated, but we're also going to need additional information with regard to diligence, as you indicated. And so we'll start with that, but first I'll ask whoever might be testifying today to please rise to be sworn in. Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Okay. Thank you. And Ms. Stern, we'll start with you with an opening on good cause.
Thank you. Good morning to you all. In today's testimony, you will hear that Johnson Controls acted diligently and moved quickly as soon as they understood a variance was needed. And we will focus the testimony on the month of October 2019, which was a month of a lot of confusion related to Rule 1111. And Johnson Controls really did not understand that the variance was necessary until October 23rd, or even the 24th, after the first interim variance was granted and the word got back to them that that in fact had happened. And so then they moved quickly, and they will certainly be able to talk about everything that they did, all the steps that they took to move quickly to get their application submitted right away. In addition, as I did watch all the other testimony, there was a lot of discussion about adverse impact certainly to homeowners and also the installers, but there was not discussion about the distributors, and the distributors have a very unique relationship. Their welfare and business are tied very closely to the manufacturers. And so you will also hear testimony today about the adverse impact on those distributors, and particularly Johnson Controls distributors, if Johnson Controls does not get this variance today. So I think with that, I can sum it up and turn to the testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Reichert, any opening on good cause?
Just the district is not opposed to a finding of good cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Stern, you may present your first witness on good cause.
Thank you. Okay. My first witness is Brian Rocky. Brian, can you please spell your name for the record?
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. So Brian Rocky, B-R-Y-A-N, R-O-C-K-Y, and I am Director of Technical Services and quality for JCI in our residential business group out of Wichita, Kansas. I've been in this position with Johnson Controls as a Director of Engineering, followed by Director of Product Management in my current position now for the last 4 years out of 19 years service with Johnson Controls. As part of my duties, I am involved in technical services and supports with our customers and our distribution channel partners. So from end users, being homeowners, consumers, building owners, all the way through our distribution channel. In addition to that, I'm involved representing our residential business group for legal and insurance matters with our distributors or with our consumers in particular to make sure that they have all appropriate rights and privileges under things like our warranty policies or any indication of issues due to damage or property or personal injury. So a lot of experience there. I'm also an assistant as far as involved in regulatory affairs. Chris Forth, who is our Director of Industry Standards and Technical Activities, is the primary focus for our team in our residential and commercial ducted systems group. Dave Stevens is his Director of Global Standards, and I'm involved in Department of Energy, EPA activities, ASHRAE, American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioner engineers, as well as 2 industry trade organizations, AHRI, American Refrigeration Heating Institute, and HRAI for Canada, which does the same thing. So very familiar with the regulatory side of these activities. And as part of our residential leadership team, I've been aware of a lot of these activities going back with our ultra-low NOx furnaces since the start of this program for our Johnson Controls brands.
And can you confirm that you took the oath this morning?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Could you briefly explain what types of furnaces are sold in this district?
Yes, so from our particular product standpoint, for the ultra-low NOx, due to ongoing activities and in consulting with our primary distribution partner channel, we focused on 80% standard residential furnaces and a high-efficiency condensing furnace that's a 95% brand. So we have currently 6 models that are involved in this of different capacities. These models are a small portion of our total furnace offering, but the impacts of engineering, testing, development time, and overall somewhat uncertainty where the market was going to be for these products had constrained us a bit as far as the type products we initially offered. But we wanted to make sure that we had product for our key customers in the Air Quality Management District to meet these ultra-low NOx requirements.
And to what elevation are these products compliant?
Yeah, the current designs that we offer for sale have been design certified by us to be installed up to 5,000 feet at this point, and we are investigating the activities required as part of this process to see how far we need to go and what the impact on our business beyond the 5,000 feet.
And then what brands are affiliated with Johnson Controls that are sold in the district?
So primarily our brand here is going to be known as York Heating Air Conditioning. We also, as a second brand, some of our products might be Coleman. At this point, with the distributors we have, there's a possibility, but unlikely, that we would have several other brands involved. That would be Luxair and Champion. Then we have Guardian and Evcon. So we actually sell these products under 6 different brands at this point. But the majority of what our customers will be buying will be York, followed by Coleman.
So in the previous hearings, evidence was presented to show that the OEMs were surprised to learn that the ultra-low NOx gas-fired furnaces would not work at elevations above 5,000 feet unless there were modifications that were not yet available. Was Johnson Controls in that same situation as one of the OEMs?
Yeah, exactly. So the discussion points, as this group obviously knows, with our competition and efforts that have been happening there, We had some understanding of what was needed. We were going through the process and trying to identify exactly the impacts of the different variation requests that were submitted to you from our competition, understanding with our local distributor, U.S. Air Conditioning out of City of Industry, the impacts on their business. But we really were working on several different alternatives until we got to the point of the findings that were done roughly the 14th to the 23rd of October. And basically the decision points on this group's activities on the 23rd of October led us to finalizing the path that we were moving forward to make sure that our petition for variance was appropriate and complete as the information we understood was required.
So in early October, because the rule went into effect as of October 1st, in early October, in those first couple weeks, what approach did you think the district was using to allow furnaces to be sold at the high altitude? Should I rephrase that?
No, so again, we were going back through the variance process and then the activity that through our customers related to the private, the enforcement discussion that was going on. So we were not anticipating that this variance process we're going through today was either necessary or appropriate when we were involved in this in early October.
And at what point did you realize that the variance process was the right process to go through?
Yeah, I believe from our engineering and product management teams and our regulatory group's viewpoint, when we received the information on the train company variance that was the 14th, I think we probably received it on the 15th or 16th, that was the direction that we needed to move forward from their application. And then following that, when this group's ongoing activities continued with our competitors' discussion, as we realized what was going on with this.
By this group, are you referring to the hearing board?
I'm sorry, yes, the hearing
Okay,
board.
thank you. I just wanted to be very clear.
Thank you for the clarification, yes.
So on the 14th, you saw that Train had filed their variance application and was having their hearing, and then what happened after that? Why wasn't your application filed right after that?
Well, as we went through this discussion, there was not just the activity on the 14th, there was the other activity by the hearing board with the activities of Carrier Corporation as well as Goodman Manufacturing. And so we were trying to identify all of the different impacts of those actions by the hearing board and understanding the differences in the submittals from our competition. While we all do business very similar not just in California, but in other areas, there are always differences in the processes internally as well as understanding any actions from a regulatory body.
And on the 17th, did you see that the Goodman's request for interim variance was denied?
Yes.
Okay, when did you actually start working on your variance application then?
So after the activities of October 23rd,
When Train's
yes,
application was
with the Train's interim variance being granted, our management team and the regulatory people involved in this, including our engineering staff, started immediately working on gathering the appropriate information for our own variance. That process was started on the 24th. There were a number of meetings, primarily with our engineering team as well as with our customer at U.S. Air through our sales group, those conversations led by Doug McLeish, who's sitting next to me, and he will talk about that activity. And so we had to gather the information, process it, and then as we went through that process, which took about 6.5 days internally, we had to go through 2 levels of management review because of the impacts on our business, as well as in order to move forward with this activity, there's always resources involved, and we had to determine, and our management team determined what we weren't going to do to make sure we did the appropriate actions here. So that's why the discussion between the 24th and our filing on October 31st took 7 days. We finished our final second-level management review on the 31st, and the data was immediately submitted to the Air Quality Management District, and I believe that was submitted on the 31st and recorded into the record on November 1st.
And you mentioned that it took 7 days, but was there a weekend in there?
There's always weekends in all, in these things, but yeah, so appropriate
So it really
people.
took less than 7 business days.
You could say it, yes, absolutely took less than 7 business days.
Great. Thank you.
Ms. Reichert, do you have any questions?
I think the questions I have are going to be on at the next stage, so no questions on good cause. Thanks.
Any questions for Mr. Ronke, Senator?
Did you say you're an engineer?
Yes, sir.
Or you're a lawyer also?
I am not a lawyer, but I've been involved with enough of them over the years as far as understanding at least somehow how they think and the type of activities we go through.
Raise the question because as you describe your responsibilities and duties, sound like it had a legal overtone.
There is definitely a part of my job that is involved with lawyers and involving our legal team and also involving remediation and justification of activities. One of the key things with our consumers is we do not want to penalize our consumers in any situation, whether they felt they were not satisfied or supportive. We want to take care of our consumers, and we also understand we want to protect their rights as well as the rights of our contractors, our distribution partners, and our own company activities.
Are you a primary manufacturer or distributor?
We
Or
are a
both?
manufacturer, sir, of HVAC equipment. Like the other companies that have come before you this month, Johnson Controls builds product for all segments of refrigeration, commercial, and residential HVAC equipment and sells that around the world. We are currently about a $25 billion sales revenue company, and we do business in 130-some countries. My particular involvement with residential and light commercial is primarily focused on Canada and the U.S.
You're primarily a manufacturer and distributor, or one or both?
So we are primarily a manufacturer by any definition that you'd like to use.
I don't like to use any, use what you tell me.
Okay. Yeah, while we do not have, we have a very limited factory-owned distribution, but those locations are not in California at this point. They are in other parts of the country, Southeast U.S., Northeast, Midwest, Chicago, St. Louis, things like that. The closest one to here would be Seattle.
Right. Did you watch any of the film from the previous discussions?
I did watch some of the content, yes, sir.
Right. Did you took notice of the fact that some of the manufacturers felt that they're in competition with the distributors?
Yes, sir. I understand that.
So you don't have that problem?
No, there, again, it's a matter of how your business model is. In our commercial, heavy commercial building type activity, we do act more as a distributor, but in our residential and light commercial product, we are 90% plus of our business is through our independent two-party distribution channel. And that's a preferred method for us, which does lead to some interesting business discussions internally within Johnson Controls of how we go to market.
You made a lot of engineering in trying to comply with 1111?
Yes, sir.
They asked for how much money so far?
Yes, sir. For approximately through September of 2019, on the ultra-low NOx product, our engineering and R&D groups and overall residential group spent approximately $2.4 million specifically on the ultra-low NOx furnace designs. And we are still going to continue to expend resources and money on that as we continue with meeting the requirements for the future rule as far as weatherized furnaces and manufactured housing furnaces that we also make that are sold within the district.
That's in the same area that the other manufacturers were doing their research as well. Do you benefit from anything they've done or just what you've done?
While there are similarities in the designs of the equipment, since
Right.
we started with basically the same type of products, There are some unique differences between the other manufacturers, but there are also some similarities that we can and our engineers do learn from as product is done and introduced into the market. I will tell you that every manufacturer will always look at the competition's new product designs, and in this situation, ultra-low NOx furnaces, I can assure you, my own personal view is that every manufacturer has probably at least bought and tested everybody else's ultra-low NOx furnace, just to make sure if we haven't missed something or to learn from what our competition does.
Very good, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And just to be clear, Johnson Controls has compliant ultra-low NOx furnaces for 5,000 or below, 5,000 feet.
That is correct.
And the variance sought today, the interim product variance, is merely as the others that we've heard for high altitude.
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay. I have a question, but I don't know if Ms. Stern, you were planning on introducing the declaration of Laura Orozco?
Yes, I was going to do that when we talked about adverse impact with our
Okay.
second witness.
Okay, okay, then I'm going to mark that as Exhibit 1. And then I'll wait, because my question was, if you wish to present this for adverse impact, it would be hearsay, which we can accept, but we would need not just to rely solely on it, so your second witness would also testify as to these matters. Okay.
Yes.
Then I'll hold my question in relation to that. Mr. Balagopalan, you have a question?
Mr. Rocky, so has Johnson Control been working on the technology for the high altitude?
Yes, sir. We have started the engineering investigation as part of the activities that we need to do to understand the engineering challenges. So we have started internally with our lab evaluation, and we will move forward with a outsourced consultant activity as far as actual physical testing at altitude. There's only one company really available today that does that as an independent test lab. And so our competition would be doing the same thing, or probably already are doing the same thing. But we are putting together the plan and the timing for the specific engineering activities and launch activities to build any changes that need to be made.
So, and that's a new, recent activity, you say?
Yes.
About a few months ago, or is it a?
No,
relative-
so this activity for testing above 5,000 feet started basically with our discussion on October 24th as related to this interim variance request.
So prior to that, Johnson Control was not aware there's a need for high altitude, and there's a market for
That
it?
is correct. We were not understanding the full complexity of the issue or what our market requirements might be. Some of that Doug will talk about in his activities as far as our director of sales for this area with our customer. But we did not have the understanding that this would be necessary moving forward.
But you do have the low NOx burners available for high altitude?
Yes.
Okay, but then you didn't anticipate that you need the similar thing for the ultra low NOx for high altitude?
That is correct.
Why is that?
Well, we go back to the discussion of the marketplace and the impacts on the market with the added cost and complexity of these gas furnaces to achieve the ultra-low NOx. And the assumption made, rightly or wrong, by our product management team that defines the vision scope requirements of these type of projects with our engineering team, relying on customer comments, was that the majority of this market was actually going to be propane, not natural gas. And so when you're talking about expending significant resources for a very small market segment, we did not have, I would say, probably appropriate information to make the decision at the time, which is why we've been going back through with our customers to understand the market needs in these high altitude applications in California in these air quality management districts.
Okay, thank you.
Board members, any other questions for this witness? Thank you very much. Ms. Stern, you had a second witness you wish to introduce?
Yes, thank you. Okay, the second witness is Doug McLeish. Doug, can you please spell your name for the record?
Doug McLeish, M-C-L-E-I-S-H.
And can you confirm that you took the oath today?
Yes, I did.
And Doug, can you describe your position within the company?
I've been working for Johnson Controls for about 7 years. Prior to that, I worked for independent distribution, and mainly I worked for 20 years. I worked for US Air, which is basically the account I call on. My responsibilities are the Western sales for York, mainly US Air. They have 50 locations in the West, of which they have, quite a few in your market area, along with throughout California. So my responsibility is all the JCI brands sold to US Air, of which they, Brian talked, that they had the York brand, they have the Luxair brand, and they have the Guardian brand. But like Brian stated, the majority of the volume is the York brand.
Okay, and in prior hearings, for which the testimony is incorporated here, there was testimony presented concerning the adverse impacts to installers because they will not have furnaces available at high altitudes. Would this be true of Johnson Controls also, that the installers would be impacted?
Yes.
And are there others in the supply chain that would also have an adverse impact?
Yeah, one of the, in listening and getting information on your previous presenters of other manufacturers, one of the things I think was maybe left out, why I don't know, is that the key relationship, Brian touched on two-step distribution. The relationship, it's almost like a car dealer. If you're a Ford dealer, you don't sell Chevys. If you can't get enough Fords, distribution is very much tied to the relationship with the manufacturers, and that also builds equity in the different brands you sell. So the dealer has the opportunity, if he can't get a product from, say, US Air, a legal furnace, he can always go to a different distributor that has a legal furnace. US Air just can't say, I'm going to, in this case, tomorrow I'm going to start buying a Lennox furnace or a Carrier furnace, because of the relationship they have with the JCI Corporation. So it's really, if you're missing a niche market, it can be very financially hurting.
What would, well, we'll get to this when we talk about the declaration. So who is Laura Orozco?
Laura Orozco is Vice President of Sales for US Air Conditioning, which they have 50 locations in the West.
And what is her relationship to JCI?
They currently have a distributor agreement to sell the JCI products in their market areas in the West.
So she, in her business, she only sells JCI products?
Correct. They do sell some other ductless split, a different manufacturer, but in unitary products, she sells only the JCI products.
Great. And did you speak with Laura
Yes, I
before
have.
she wrote her declaration?
Numerous times.
And what concerns did she express if JCI did not receive the interim variance?
Well, because Laura, there's some distributors who have made presentations to you, just sell the product, and they would, in some cases, they own distribution. In this case, it's our distribution is independent. US Air Conditioning sells the equipment, the parts and supplies, all the ductwork. So their contractors would come to them to put a job, let's say in Big Bear or Lake Arrowhead, and they would buy everything from US Air. So it would not just be the furnace sales that they could possibly lose. It could be the service sales they could possibly lose, along with the condensing unit, along with all the ductwork and parts and supplies that go with that. So it's like a 2 or 3 or 4 multiplier. It's not just the equipment that's affected by it.
So she can't mix and match different brand equipment?
Like I stated earlier, no, they would, with any distributor agreement that any manufacturer has, they would, if they decided to open up with another brand, they could forfeit their distributor agreement with the manufacturer. And that's just not with us, that's with all the other brands.
And what would she need to do to open up a relationship with another brand?
Well, she'd have to find out what brand is not currently sold here already. But in most manufacturers, if they were to do that, it's like a 1-year process. And US Air used to be the Carrier Corporation's largest distributor, independent distributor, and I was involved in changing from the Carrier brands to the JCI brands, and we did that over 90 days, but it was a long, drawn-out inventory, customer base. It's a huge project to be able to do that.
And so she would lose business in that interim time?
No question about it.
And what is the impact to Johnson Controls if a partner like US Air would switch to another brand?
Loss of sales. And then at the same time, they'd have to find somebody to take their place.
And so you also would not have a distributor then in the area?
Correct. You just don't go down to Home Depot and find another one.
So once you had furnaces that were compliant above 5,000 feet, you would not have a distributor to sell them until you developed a new relationship?
Correct. And along with that, though, the good distributors have a lot of great relationships with their contractors. And one of the, also things part of this equation is you have a relationship, the contractor feels that the manufacturer, in this case, JCI Brands or York, US Air, is tied to those contractors. Contractors have basically invested their time and effort and money with training with the JCI or York brand. And they kind of feel like, hey, if you're not going to support me in a higher altitude and defend me, you're not loyal to me. I want to go to somebody that is.
Thank you.
Ms. Reichard, any questions?
Yes, thank you. How many distributors does Johnson Controls, or how many distributors are there that distribute Johnson Controls products in the basin?
Johnstone supports the Coleman brand, and we have there's a Danco Supply in LA that supports the Fraser Johnson brand. They're quite small, and then US Air.
So just three, Johnstone, Dancool, and US Air?
Correct.
Okay. No further questions, thank you.
Board members, questions for Mr. McLeish? Thank you. Yes, Mr. Balagopalan?
Mr. McLeish, so when did US Air were supplying to the Big Bear market?
Correct.
The 40 nanogram furnaces and
For years.
for years. So they knew that they need natural gas up there, correct?
Correct.
So when did they inform that you're going to have a problem with the 14 nanogram?
It's embarrassing to say, because I've been in this market for a long time, that the industry, and I also blame everybody involved in this, didn't do their proper homework. And because, and I had a conversation earlier today, and I didn't know this, that Big Bear, for instance, mostly is all natural gas. I made the assumption, in my opinions, because I've been involved in this since day one, is that, you get out to those rural areas and higher altitude, like Brian alluded to, was propane. I didn't personally realize, it's obviously our competitors didn't either, that how many gas furnaces were sold above the 5,000 feet.
And US Air didn't?
They found out shortly after October 1st, it surfaced.
That they don't have compliant units?
Yes, the contractors say, hey, this is great, and the US Air did a lot of training, and it just seemed like they'd get, both in Southern California and Northern California, because you've got a district up there that's also involved in this, and it's mind-boggling to me that my phone didn't ring off the hook until the beginning of October, and originally I felt that it's just a few contractors, not that big a deal to go away, and then, I found out very shortly that we didn't do our proper homework, and there's a lot more homes affected than I thought there were going to be.
And do you have any idea of the sales for that market during this interim period?
As far as volume?
Volume, yeah.
It's in the hundreds, not the thousands. But the issue is that a lot of contractors that do volume up there are down from the valley, and so it's not the downside for us being a manufacturer and, or in this case, the distributor, all distributors, is that volume they lose for that customer, because he's going to be wanting to do all his business there, not only the high altitude, middle altitude, or lower altitude, and that's the possibility if you don't have a product line that's going to meet all their needs, you're going to lose not only the couple hundred furnaces that guy might give you up on the higher altitude, you're going to lose everything. So there's more to it than just a few furnaces up on the higher altitude.
And I meant to ask Mr. Rocky about this. Do you, if I can?
Oh, did you want to switch to Mr.
Switch to
Rocky?
Rocky,
Could we wait?
Yeah,
and
we
then
can
see
wait,
if there's
yeah.
any other questions for
Yeah.
Mr. McLeish?
And maybe Mr. McLeish can answer it if not, I'll wait. Now that Johnson Control is working on it, how long do you anticipate the process to take and get its testing and certified?
I'll give you my answer, then Brian can follow up later, is that one of the things and I'll speak for my industry knowledge, not just working with Johnson Controls, is that every single furnace needs to be tested individually. So in our case, we have 6 furnaces. Each furnace has to be tested. And because of all the regulations that are coming before our industry, everybody is limited on lab time to be able to test that. And as Brian alluded to, there's only one company that really does high altitudes. And so there's going to be a log jam for getting everybody's family of furnaces through that, tested at whatever altitude you're going to test them in. And the other issue is that when you have, again, right now we're good till 4,000 or 5,000 feet. The question is, what's that other number going to be? And the higher the altitude, the longer the testing is going to take, because there's multiple places you have to test for. So that just draws out that process and the timing. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think
as
you
far as timing.
partially did because of the testing and the delay, because there's only one certified company. But do you have the technology in place, or is it how far are you from getting the technology?
I'll let Brian answer that as far as technical side.
Thank you.
And are there other questions for Mr. McLeish before we go to that? Senator?
In the petition, it stated that your competitors will have an edge on you if this variance is not granted, and words to that effect. Is that correct?
Correct. On any sales above
I understand.
5,000 feet.
Now, you also are able to sell up to 5,000 feet for various BTUs.
Correct.
And was that as a result of your research or somebody you bought?
I'm not sure I understand your question. We have different capacities of furnaces in both the 95 family AFUE and the 80% family AFUE. So we're limited to be able to sell the matching house with the matching BTU. We do think that we're covered on the BTUs on the 80% and the 95% to pretty well cover, the majority of the marketplace. And that's why we decided to come out with the family of furnaces that we did. I don't know if that answered your question.
Is there any reason why you did not make an effort to be exempted from Rule 1111 prior to the action that the board took? It's clear.
Are you talking about the high altitude market? Because that's the only thing relevant.
The high altitude.
So to be exempted, do you mean seek a variance?
Be waived.
Do you mean seek a
To
variance?
allow them to sell equipment above 5,000 feet.
Okay, so what is the question?
I'll repeat it this time again. Is there any reason why Johnson did not take the initiative to ask the district to waive that requirement early on? Please, let him answer the question.
Well, let me just say for the record, we did incorporate all the evidence and testimony received in the last 3 hearings on this, and the testimony was that the district itself was not aware that the high-altitude market was not covered until the rule took effect. So are you asking Mr. McLeish why they did not seek an exemption prior to the rule being in
As
the district understanding that there was an issue?
They didn't do what their competitors did, to seek exemption, and when they saw that, they got it. And I'm just asking why they didn't take that initiative.
I think
variance, okay.
I think that I thought that Brian covered that. I'll leave it to.
They did not.
Well, I thought he did as far as the timing, that we went down that path. We were delayed to do it for various reasons. There was communications or lack of or confusion.
I don't understand what you're saying. Tell me.
He's going over Mr. Rocky's testimony. Mr. Rocky's testimony was that they watched the hearings that this board held with regard to Goodman, Train, and Carrier, and it was upon the granting by this board of the interim product variance, and tell me if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, to Train on October 24th, that they recognized that they too would have to follow in this path. That was the testimony.
I heard that. And my question is, Train took, those other companies, your competitors, took the initiative to take some action, but you didn't. I was asking why you didn't join early on. Because you had a lot of research going on.
It's probably not a question for Mr.
Best
McLeish. It's
for
probably best if
for
we-
Mr. Rocky. So, and I know that Mr. Balagopalan had a question for Mr. Rocky too. So does anyone else have questions for Mr. McLeish? And if not, we can move right to that answer and then to the one for Mr. Balagopalan. Is that, okay. Okay, so Mr. Rocky, you may answer that question.
Yeah, so to answer your question, when we became aware of the activities that our competitors were doing, we were uncertain as to what the impact was going to require from us as a company. We were uncertain as to the interpretations and the ruling of the Air Quality Management District and the hearing board activities. So we started the activity of gathering information internally, which included listening, watching the videos, having the conversations that have been referred to help us understand exactly the most appropriate path for us as a company. And in doing that, that did relate to, we had to go through this entire explanation to our management team of what the problem was and what we needed to do. And like any good management team, they always start asking, how long is it going to take? When can you have it done? What's it going to cost? And what are you not going to do because you're diverting resources? So the period from early October to basically the 24th of October is when we went through that entire process of our own internal due diligence to make sure we understood the process, what was asked, what was the impact on us and our distribution partner and customers. And as soon as we came to an internal realization of that process is when we started on our variance activity that culminated in our submittal on October 31st. Does that answer your question?
Prior there too, the district had a process to follow if you wanted to have an exemption above 5,000 feet. Is that correct?
We, at that
To fill out the
point,
form, I mean,
The enforcement
yeah,
discretion.
come on. I'm not in your position. I'm just asking questions.
yeah, I am not aware of the knowledge of anyone before this engagement of the time frame that we were talking about, that this was even necessary or required of us.
It says in the petition, upon the district changing its process for approving of high-altitude furnace installation, all furnace manufacturers must now apply for interim irregulars. So there was a process. If you don't recall, that's okay.
No, I'm sorry. I do not recall that discussion as far as that particular information.
Well, in the previous hearing, there was a discussion on that subject matter, most definitely. Because at that point in time is when the district became aware that it had to make some changes in the process.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Is my understanding that that activity was what was defined in the hearing on October 23rd that was clarified by the hearing board for one of our competitors, and that's what led us to the immediate realization of what we needed to do for our own interim variance request.
Okay, meaning it was made clear that that process would no longer exist? Is
Right.
that what you're saying? The enforcement discretion
Yes.
process? Okay.
I'm sorry, yes, that is correct. That the process that we're going through today was the appropriate process for us to do. We became aware of that on the 23rd of October and started immediately to do that process internally.
My line of question was associated with the fact, based on your testimony, that your engineers buy products from your competitor to make sure that you're at the state of the art.
That is absolutely correct. We do buy and test furnaces and air conditioners from our competition. And in those activities, when those products were available, we did that with the understanding that those products were good up through nominal conditions. It was not understood by our engineering team or our product management team that they should be considered for test for application above 4,000 feet. In other words, the high altitude application we're talking about.
Not understood by your engineering and development team.
There was no specification brought
understand.
forward that said that these units needed to be tested as a comparison testing above the 4,000 feet.
So you followed them in that regard based on state of the arts.
As far as testing our competitors'
I
furnaces,
understand.
that is correct. Now, our own internal testing had been completed, that our engineers said, because they always know that product managers and our salespeople will push the envelope. Our internal engineering teams and their testing had verified that our product would be able to function correctly, safely, in accordance with our safety standard testing up to 5,000 feet as designed.
So you tend to follow the progress of competitors sometime when necessary. And like today, you are following your competitors by trying to get some kind of consideration from the board. I understand the point you're making. But as you watched the film on this issue previously, they're probably watching it today.
I understand,
Okay.
and I would absolutely agree with you.
Okay, Mr. Balagopalan, if you could repeat the question that you had for Mr. Rocky.
Before I go to the question, I sort of wanted to follow up what the senator asked, and because we had prior testimony from district staff that they had contacted all the manufacturers and informed them that the enforcement discretion is a temporary thing and apply for a product variance. Did they? Are you aware of that communication from district staff?
Sir, I'm aware that the communication was made. I am not directly involved in the conversations that may have been held between the district and our management team involved in the regulatory. I know that the discussion was brought up as far as the question, and that it led to ongoing discussions as a part of our residential management team of what we needed to do and how we best would move forward. So it was not, we did not act in a void. We did not just stop and say, we're not going to do anything until this is resolved. But we were unsure from a regulatory standpoint what we needed to do. So our engineering team did not have clear direction of what they needed to go do.
Fair enough. Okay, let me go to my other question. And that was, how long is this process going to take for the?
So, as Doug said, so as we go through the testing, let me add a few extra comments to help you with understanding that. In our petition, we indicate that we will have the product available in October of 2020. The reason for that is we have 6 existing furnaces that have to be retested at higher altitudes, above 5,000 feet. Part of that is the engineering testing itself to do the complete cycle of performance and safety testing per model. Our engineers expect that it takes about 4 weeks per individual model to complete that activity for a cycle time. So that would say you have 24 man-weeks of engineering tests that need to be done. The kicker that cycles through that multiplies that is, do we test for 5,400 feet, which is the number that the carrier corporation variance is indicated? Do we need to test at 5,500 feet? Do we need to test at 6,000 feet? We're trying to figure that out. But every one of those iterations adds that additional 24 man-weeks of test time. And so assuming we get through all of that, and we do have multiple labs and we do have multiple technicians, but we have a complete portfolio of other products we have to do. So our engineers looked at the time it would take to test. They've included a factor for repeating tests. And then if we have to make any manufacturing changes to the actual furnaces we're selling today, up through 5,000 feet, the process to make the engineering change documentation can be anywhere from a few weeks up to 12 weeks, 3 months, et cetera. And then you have to make those changes in production with your manufacturing team and with suppliers. And so at this point, our engineers have estimated this is approximately an 11-month project from where we are today to do the testing, do the engineering change analysis, work with our suppliers and our manufacturing team to implement any changes that are required, as well as we have to get agency approval from CSA because we have changed the basic design of the product. That testing is included, but it goes through a paperwork process as well. So to be able to do this in 11 months or so, without knowing the scope of what we have to change, is probably a realistic estimation from our viewpoint.
And CSA, you're referring to the Canadian.
So the Canadian Standards Association is responsible as the authority having jurisdiction on the ANSI Z2147 safety standard for central central furnaces. So CSA is the organization that publishes that standard, but they are also one of several organizations that tests manufacturers' furnaces independently to that standard. Underwriters Laboratory, Intertech, and CSA are the main three in our industry. We happen to use CSA as our certification body of that standard.
Does CSA test certification extend to the high altitude? I thought they only go to 5,000 feet, they certify.
No, under the guidelines of the National Fuel Gas Code, a manufacturer may have a furnace design certified up through 10,000 feet elevation. Our standard furnaces are certified up above 5,000 feet with the D rate, orifices, minor changes, and everything else. But we follow the National Fuel Gas Code requirements for elevation above 4,000 feet. Our products are certified for that design. Our current 40 nanogram per joule furnace is actually been certified as well to 5,000 feet, as our standard furnaces have gone beyond that as well, the non-ultra low NOx.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Senator, questions?
The certification requirements, is that public information? Was an industry such as yours apply for certification?
Yes.
One that preceded you, same thing. Is that public information?
The CSA standard, ANSI Z2047, CSA 2.3 is available to the public. It is a document that is purchased from those organizations that do standards. The test requirements are public knowledge, and basically what certifying our furnaces to that standard allows any manufacturer to do is to put the certifying body logo on our rating plates. The importance of that is that based on local building codes and state building codes, if we do not have that certification on our products, by law, we cannot sell and install those products. So having the certification file, our test files are not public knowledge, but the standard and the requirements are.
So the standards are public information?
Yes, sir.
And so when you file such a request, it's known by your competitors? The
Yes.
results are, come on, please, yes.
So as a safety test standard, those requirements are a minimum requirement for safety and performance. So the fact that we are allowed to have the logo of CSA or UL on our rating plates indicates to any of our competitors that we meet the minimum safety requirements as defined by that ANSI standard.
So your certifications is also made public,
Yes, sir.
and your competitors are made public also?
Yes, sir.
So, all right, you got my point.
Yes, sir.
Okay, are there any other questions on good cause for either witness?
May I ask one more question
Yes.
when you're finished?
Ms. Stern?
With respect to, following competitors in the marketplace, can you describe JCI's market share with respect to some of the other competitors, for example, Carrier or Goodman in the district? Or generally, if you don't know, in California?
So overall, in residential central-fired gas furnaces, approximate market share based on AHRI, Air Conditioning, Heating, Refrigeration Institute numbers, which is also available from that organization as public information on sales volume. Carrier and Goodman are approximately the same market share across the U.S., somewhere in the 25 to 27%. Lennox in general is going to be somewhere around 17 to 19% based on numbers, and these numbers are my estimation based on total volumes. The specific brand information is not necessarily available to the public in general. So Carrier and Goodman are the largest. Lennox is number 3 in the market. Trane is number 4, somewhere in the 14 to 16%. Johnson Controls is number 5. And we are currently somewhere in furnaces down in the 5 to 7%. And then there are a few other players below that.
So it's much smaller in comparison with the other manufacturers.
Yes. And I think Doug could probably relate to sales within the district itself as far as our furnaces here, if desired.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you. Ms. Reckard, did you want to introduce your witness for good cause?
Well, I was going to ask if the board wanted information about the rule amendment at this stage or in the next.
I think this would be helpful, especially because what we're looking at is an interim variance between now and December 12th. I think the board should be aware of what might occur before that time.
Absolutely. The district calls Sean Wang. Mr. Wang, please state and spell your name for the record.
First name Sean, S-H-A-W-N. Last name Wang, W-A-N-G.
Thank you. And did you take the oath this morning?
Yes, I did.
And what is your position here at the district?
Air quality specialist.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the proposed amendment to Rule 1111 that's set for hearing at the governing board on December 6th?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And can you just briefly describe what that amendment would do if it is adopted by the board?
So currently in the rule language and supporting documents released to the public, the rule amendment hearing set for December 6th will add an exemption for furnaces to be sold, distributed, installed above 4,300 feet above sea level.
Okay. And how long would that exemption last?
The exemption will last roughly 1 year past the final compliance date, which is October 1st, 2020.
Past the last compliance date of October 1st, 2019.
Right. October 1st, 2019 is the final compliance date for condensing and non-condensing furnaces per Rule 1111.
So the amendment would provide an exemption for high altitudes for the non-compliant units to be sold through October 1st, 2020?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned that it's 4,300 feet above sea level. Can you just explain the discrepancy between that and what we've been hearing at the variance hearings?
So the 4,300 feet above sea level was a recent change due to the topological information we received about the area around Lake Arrowhead and Big Bear. So it's the areas around the communities up on that mountain range from between 4,300 feet to anywhere above 6,000, 7,000 feet.
So to create uniformity in the community and to ease the burden on installers and distributors, staff decided to set the limit at 4,300?
Correct, because there's no distribution points up on the mountain itself.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Ms. Stern, do you have any questions for Mr. Wang on that testimony?
No, I do not.
Board members, any questions for Mr. Wang on that testimony? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wang. Okay. I won't ask if there's any member of the public who wishes to be heard, since there is no public notice, but we did hear from members of the public anyway on our other related hearings. Ms. Stern, do you have a closing statement on good cause?
Yes. We very much appreciate the opportunity to submit testimony today, and I hope that you have heard with sincerity that JCI was not delaying. They weren't avoiding the variance process. They weren't ignoring it. They legitimately had confusion over the approach to take. I mean, the company knew about the enforcement discretion forms, And not very many of them were used by their installers, so they were not hearing, as Train was, for example, right away that this was a problem. And they really did not realize in that early part of October that that was not the right mechanism to use. And then on October 17th, as you know, the Goodman had its hearing, but there was confusion between the enforcement discretion process and the variance process, and so they didn't start right away at that October 17th date because they weren't sure the variance process was the right process to use. So it really was not until October 23rd, 24th, when they heard that Train received their variance, that they knew that they had to submit this paperwork, and they did get right on it. As Mr. Rocky testified, you know, it does take a little bit. There's engineering data, there's emissions data that needs to be identified, and it took several levels of review. So it did take, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 working days to submit that application, but they were working on that the whole time. In addition, the adverse impact to the distributors is real, and it's a big concern for JCI, and it's an impact to them. If their distributors can't sell their product, that is really unfair competitive advantage to the other distributors that are able to sell the product, and it causes JCI to lose a very important and long-standing business relationship that they have with their distributors. So really, in all fairness, it seems like we hope that you heard that JCI is deserving of this interim variance in the same way that their competitors are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Reichard, any closing on good cause?
Just the district is not opposed to a finding of good cause. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, we have heard now this situation, let's say, and now this is the 4th time we're hearing it with a 4th different manufacturer, and I think it's important to note that. And the reason why I think it's important is I think the district was caught unaware, and again, we're incorporating evidence and testimony that we heard in the other 3 related matters. This was something that the district did not anticipate. We heard that manufacturers don't talk to each other. We heard that manufacturers assume that this was a very, very small percentage of the overall sales, and that it was going to be covered by other manufacturers. And we heard that the district itself, staff was just not aware that that this would not, that there would be such a hole left in the market for the high altitude furnaces. And so as a result, we've been looking at this very holistically, and I think we should continue to do so. Unfortunately, we as a hearing board, we will recall we had a lot of issues whether we were the appropriate body to be hearing this. I do believe, and I think we all would probably agree, that the governing board is the proper body, since it is their role. They have a more far-reaching jurisdiction, and they can grant exemptions much more broadly and widely. However, there is a lag between when the governing board can do that. I understand they are hastening to do, the time and really trying to fill that in. And now we have they will have a hearing on December 6th, and one way or the other, this issue will be handled by the looking at our findings for interim variance and good cause, as we were for the other 3 manufacturers, in that it's not necessarily the manufacturers that are being harmed, but it is the manufacturers that have to come to us and ask for this type of product variance relief. So let's look at each one in that way for this matter as well. And so looking at the first finding we need to make, which is that petitioner is in violation of a rule or regulation. Again, we're talking about Rule 1111, or that such violation is imminent. We were looking at this not petitioner by petitioner or manufacturer by manufacturer, but holistically looking at those high altitudes, those people who are up there who are facing already cold weather, and who need furnaces, and the fact that there are no compliant furnaces for those high altitudes, and that a violation is imminent if any furnace, non-compliant, is installed in those high altitudes. And so certainly that is the situation. I know that there are variances that are now in effect because the hearing board, our hearing board did grant them. However, we had concerns that it was not holistically being applied because we're hearing one manufacturer at a time. And so as soon as that first interim variance for Train was granted, that process, which was more far-reaching, that enforcement discretion process, no longer exists. And so we've created not monopolies, but we're creating them one by one, different manufacturers that can be put in place, and that's problematic too. And we're seeing, first we heard it's problematic for those people who are living in the high altitudes who need a range of furnaces to choose from for different applications. Then we heard at the Train hearing that the installers were impacted because there's particular installers for up in those high altitudes. And now we're hearing that whole distributors are impacted because they have particular relationships that are exclusive with manufacturers, and so they are impacted, and the manufacturers, and in this case it would be Johnson Controls, are also impacted. We already made the finding with regard to anticipated and sufficient time for public notice. This was not an issue that was known even by district staff. Were taken by surprise after the October 1st deadline for the Rule 1111 deadline. So all we really have to look at, I think, is diligence. And I do agree that generally speaking, this hearing board doesn't, when petitioners take days or weeks and we ask, well, why did you come in right away? Usually we would not find that to be diligent. However, in this situation, I believe we can make the finding of diligence. Again, everyone was in a state of confusion. When we heard those original petitions from Goodman, from Train, no one was prepared for this. Sorry? Howard was not, that's not related. Okay, so let's keep Howard out of this. Howard is a completely different issue. Thank you. Train, Goodman, and Carrier are the only three hearings we are incorporating here because they're the only ones we've heard so far on high altitudes. Howard Industries, let's just say it out loud, is of a different issue, and I don't want to say too much because this is not a noticed hearing on Howard Industries, but it has to do with distribution at the lower altitudes of non-compliant furnaces. We're only talking about that little section of the market that is for high altitudes for which there is no compliant furnace. And so when we talk about diligence and filing, I believe everyone was in a state of flux. The district was not as clear as they could have been on the form that was filled out during the process, that form would disappear and that process of enforcement discretion would disappear. We ourselves as a hearing board, on the first matter we heard Goodman, we said no on, I think it was a 3-2 vote. We could not make a finding of good cause until we heard more about that process not being the best process, and that perhaps through variance relief, it would be better for everyone up there in those high altitudes. So no one knew what was going on. Everything was in a state of flux. So given that, I believe diligence can be made because, again, we're looking at this, I think, overall as to what is going to be the best interim solution for up in those high altitudes until the governing board, which is the proper body, can make the right decision and hopefully change the rule and provide for exemption relief for that high altitude market. But in the meantime, I think the broadest selection of manufacturers is going to be the best for up there. And then finally, I do believe it's in the public welfare. And when I talk about public welfare, I'm talking about, again, those people who live up there who need furnaces. the installers who solely are working in that market and the distributors that are working in that market. And if we deny the interim variance today, there will be far-reaching impacts on the public impact, and I think we have to have the broadest relief possible. With that, any other thoughts on good cause? Ms. Verdugo-Peralta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually think that vote was 4-1, but be that as it may. I do see the fact that there is very good reason to find good cause. This situation has had a rippling effect across that whole entire industry. And the fact that while they are competitors out there, they all actually saw and were affected by this. So I very much am in favor of voting yes for good cause. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have thoughts? Mr. Balagopalan, and then Senator.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think we heard about the form and the confusion regarding the form, and I think hearing, maybe they took a wait-and-see attitude to see what happens with the hearing before doing filing their own product variants. I think we heard testimony that from staff that they had informed all the manufacturers, indicating that the form was an interim measure and maybe they should file a product variance. And I think once they saw the direction and what they need to do, the competition we're getting, I think appropriately they filed the product variance. So I can see the diligence in doing that once they realized that the form was potentially going away, and they all had to get to stay in the marketplace and be competitive. They needed to get the product variance, and I'm happy to hear from staff that the district is fast-tracking and a rule will potentially get adopted, amended, that will address this issue.
Senator.
It says here, could your company have avoided the circumstances that made a variance necessary? And the answer is yes. Don't install above 5,000 feet.
I'm sorry, say that again. The answer is yes. What was the last
Yes,
part?
they could have avoided, because they do not have to install above 5,000 feet, because they don't meet the qualifications.
The only reason why I disagree is because, again, we have to look at our findings not based on the manufacturers as it's been written here, because I don't think product variances were considered for when our findings were written for interim variance relief. And I think we have been looking in each, this is the fourth hearing we've heard on high-altitude furnaces. And in each one, we're looking at, when we look at the anticipated and sufficient time to provide public notice, we're looking at the market as a whole. There are no compliant high-altitude furnaces because of, number one, we heard testimony on the nature of this industry and that manufacturers were not communicating with each other. We also heard from all of the manufacturers that this is a very small percentage of their overall sales, and so they were focused first on coming up with compliant or developing compliant ultra-low NOx furnaces for the majority market, and were not focusing on the high altitudes. We also heard that right or wrong, which I think is exactly the quote we heard today, that not only Johnson Controls, but all of the manufacturers we heard from believe that the high altitude markets, for some reason, were reliant on propane, which is an exemption to the rule. And we also heard at the other hearings, which we've incorporated today, from the district staff, Ms. Nakamura and Mr. Wang, that the district staff, the district itself, was simply not even aware that there was this hole. So to say that Johnson Controls itself could have been clairvoyant enough to know that there was a hole in the market when no other manufacturer knew and the district itself didn't know, I think is a lot to be asking. I don't think that's reasonable.
No, I was not asking it. I was just stating a fact. That is how you avoid needing a variance. And that is, simply put, you don't install above 5,000 feet, period. That's the answer to the question. Now,
and what happens to the people who live there?
Please. It was a persuasive argument, however, when it was pointed out that the people needed a furnace in the wintertime. It was cold and heat. So that's the overriding factor, notwithstanding they could be in compliance by not going above the 5,000 feet. That's the overriding factor. The other overriding factor, as previously been discussed, is the competitive market, where some have been granted that privilege, and so you ask for the same privilege to be granted. So I'm just being more detailed. Okay? That's why I raised the question. All right, very good.
Thank you, I definitely agree with that. And I can't recall, but I think it was a 3-2 vote, but I'm not sure. I believe, oh, it was 4-1? Oh, sorry, 4-1, okay. You were the one. Any other discussion on good cause? Okay, then we'll make a motion. In the matter of Johnson Controls, Inc., case number 6158-1, I move that we find good cause to hear this matter on the merits in absence of notice to the public for the reasons that we have just discussed. Is there a second? Mr. Balagopalan seconds that motion. Is there discussion? Discussion on the motion, yes. Wait, your mic.
I'm inclined to go with an aye vote. However, there's nothing in the good cause which points out the need to be in compliance with competition. And that's what we're doing this for, competition.
Well, there is, I would point out that our finding number 4, a denial of the interim variance will result in an unreasonable and unavoidable adverse impact to petitioner. And that would be the competition. But I just wanted to point out that I don't believe that this board feels or has felt for the other 3 matters that there's such an impact to petitioner itself that would justify that. And so we're looking broader too.
Broader?
Yeah, that's what we've found so far. But that would fall within that.
Maybe you should include competition later on at some point in time.
Yeah. And I think we heard more on competition today and the impact, because we did hear that potentially down the road, there would be a loss of distributorship.
Fine, that's fine.
Right, I think that's sufficient. Okay, so any other discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none. Senator, how do you vote?
Aye.
Dr. Bernstein, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Verdugo-Peralta, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Mr. Mullen, you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0. So we will move on to the merits, but let me ask, given pending lunch, whether or not we could finish before. So I'm wondering how much more testimony do you believe we need on the findings for, well, we're going to incorporate.
Yeah, so I think we should incorporate by reference the prior hearings and also this good cause hearing. And so I guess that might be a question back to you. Are there particular areas that you're interested in hearing about? Because many of these factors have already been addressed.
I think the only issue, perhaps, let me just look again at the required findings for a product variance, but I believe that we need to understand just the excess emissions,
Okay,
because I think they're different than what we've heard before, and then we'll just have to hear just one of your witnesses testify that they have read the proposed variance,
Yes.
interim product variance conditions, and will abide by those.
Yes, that would be Mr. Rocky, so we can turn back to him.
Okay, so let's turn to Mr. Rocky for those 2 issues.
Okay. Does he need to introduce himself again?
He does not need to introduce. And we're just going to say on the record, we are incorporating both the evidence and testimony from on the merits from the 3 previous Train, Goodman, and Carrier proceedings, as well as the evidence and testimony we just received on the good cause portion.
I believe on the variance condition we had for the other companies, we went down to 4,500 feet. I know this one says 5,000, just to be, the previous condition,
I believe Carriers was 5,000 feet, and in addition, since.
No, they had products for 5,000, but I thought all the conditions
Oh.
went to 4,500. I don't have the prior ones with me, but.
I don't either, but perhaps Ms. Reichard or Mr. Wang can address that when we get to it.
And I
Or
could
do you
also
want-
mention that it requires additional tracking requirements, for the company, and since they have compliant furnaces, they don't need to do those tracking requirements. So
Okay, and so it's okay with Johnson Controls to have the 5,000?
we asked for that. Mhm.
Okay, they asked for it?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
that- yeah.
So that's sufficient then. Okay, no, you do not have to just, if you just bring back on Mr. Rocky and we can
So,
move from there.
Mr. Rocky, turning to excess emissions that were discussed in our permit application,
Yes.
can you please explain how those were calculated and what the excess emissions are proposed to be?
Yeah, thank you. So as identified in our petition for variance, the process for calculating the emissions was based on the number of furnaces sold in the affected areas of the district for elevation above the 5,000 feet. So it's strictly a numerical comparison of assuming that a 40 nanogram per joule certified furnace would be installed in place of the 14 nanogram per joule ultra-low NOx furnace. And based on using some of the district's own estimated savings relative to tonnage per day of NOx at outset, and using our estimation of 400 furnaces to be installed prior to having the compliant equipment, it's strictly a straight matter of the impact as identified. The numbers are pretty straightforward from our standpoint. They are less than our competition and the other three variations, requests that you have received strictly based on the number of furnaces, as we talked about with our market share versus the numbers from our competition. So the difference is total ends up being an estimated 0.12 pounds per day for a 14 nanogram per joule furnace and 0.56 pounds per day for a 40 nanogram per joule. And if you look at the 400 or so furnaces that we are estimated being involved in this, that is a statistically fairly low total amount.
Did you have any
I have
more
no
questions?
Further
Okay.
questions on that, no.
Okay. Ms. Reichard, do you have any questions for Mr. Rocky?
No questions.
Mr. Rocky, so you have read the interim variance conditions that are proposed?
I have, yes.
And you are in agreement? Johnson Controls is in agreement?
Yes, we are in agreement.
Did we mark those?
No, sorry. We will mark them as Exhibit A. I marked them, but I didn't bother to tell anyone else. Okay, so the proposed interim variance conditions will be marked as Exhibit A as an apple.
And then I would just mention that I think Train also mentioned this, there is a general price increase that Johnson Controls is expecting in January. These interim conditions won't affect that, but just to note for the record that they had already planned that in
Okay.
advance.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and as we said at that time, this would be just for interim variance relief, so it wouldn't go through January, but we appreciate that.
And in terms of the timing, so our, if you were to find that we merit the interim product variance, our current hearing is scheduled, our regular hearing is scheduled for December 12th, but we need to ask for a continuance, just maybe for a week or so, in part because of the December 6th governing board hearing, we would like to see what happens there, and in part because my schedule, I won't be available. So we would like to request a continuance to 19th, 23rd, whatever seems to work that next week, but.
I know Goodman's hearing is scheduled the 18th or 19th. I can't remember. I was trying to look it up. Maybe we can set it on the same day. if we
Okay,
look at
so
the-
we'll look at the red book in the interim, and we
Okay.
will, and there's no objection?
No
is that correct?
objection.
Okay, so the first of a week or less that's requested is just
December
is just
18th.
granted, as long as it's agreed upon. So December 18th?
December 18th.
I think we have, Madam Clerk, I think we have,
I found it.
It is December 18th. Thank you,
Will there
though.
be time to do both on the same day, or do you want to do it the
I,
next day?
it's up to the board.
It seems there would be enough time. And if not, it would just be continued.
Put equipment first, so you don't have to worry.
Right, and then we just incorporate it. Okay, yes.
that December
I did too,
18th?
but where, okay, so where, Ms. Reichard, were you asking?
So I didn't have any questions, and then we went back to her we were marking the exhibit.
Oh, that's
and
right,
then-
I was
And then we
asking
were
questions.
changing, yeah, and you were asking.
Wait, I just had one more question. My last question is, Mr. Rocky, you had mentioned a number of different brands. York is the primary, Coleman as well, and then there were other brands. But the non-compliant furnaces for which you're requesting to be under this interim product variance are the ones that are listed on page 4, item number 5 of the petition. Is that correct? I just want to make sure we know the,
I believe the answer is yes, but let me just verify quickly to,
okay.
yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Balagopalan, you had a question?
Well, Mr. Rocky, since he's a technical manager, and I just wanted to get some clarification on what do you have to do as far as the technology for the high altitude orifice plate, looking at pressure, different altitude, you have different plates because of the difference in elevation?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I'll try to keep this a little less involved. So basically, this whole thing comes down to the combustion process, right? So you're burning gas, you're bringing in combustion air, and you have flue products. So we need to make sure that, first off, any changes we make for the higher elevation do not impact the safety standards under the CSA requirement, which in particular for furnaces relate to the amount of carbon monoxide that's allowed in the vent gases. So we have very strict requirements on that under that test procedure. That's relevant from a technical standpoint because it is known to the practitioners of our engineers, one way you can reduce NOx is to increase CO and CO2. So there is a line in there somewhere that we always, our engineers, look at. So the requirement ends up being validating where we're at as a baseline and then deciding the altitude level that we want to test to, as I talked about earlier. And we try to want to minimize, but still minimize the amount of tests, but cover the broadest marketplace. And that's the discussion of, is it 5,400 feet? Is it 6,000 feet? And I don't have that answer today. Our engineers are evaluating what it's going to take to go through the testing at different multiple altitudes. But the big difference ends up being define it, we run the tests, and because of the impact on this, it will not just be our laboratory tests and calculations. We would proceed with the independent consulting lab tests to do actual testing at altitude as the most confident building way for us to evaluate the impacts on the NOx emissions level. And that's the discussion as we talked about before. So scheduling that test and getting that completed is a big part of this time frame and requirements.
My question is really on the technology. We heard previous manufacturers say they're going to use like premix burners. Are you going that direction, or is it, how are you?
So this will be a discussion of our current ultra-low NOx technology and how far we can take it and still provide a safe and reliable and efficient product. If a time frame to go back and redo the entire combustion section of this furnace, we would be talking an 18-month to 2-year process at minimum, just due to the reliability testing activity that is required from our standpoint. For instance, we test heat exchangers to the equivalent of 20 years life under accelerated conditions. That test itself takes 9 months. And we're not going to put out a product that's not safe and reliable.
Okay, thank you.
Any other any other questions for Mr. Rocky? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Rocky. Ms. Stern, any other witnesses you wish to present on?
No other witnesses. no.
Okay. Ms. Reichart, did you wish to present Mr. Wang for anything?
No.
Okay. And we have no other questions, board members? Okay. Then let's move into closing statements.
So I will focus my closing just in a couple areas because we are incorporating the evidence and testimony from the other hearings. But I think you heard about excess emissions. They will be small. And in addition, Johnson Controls is a much smaller manufacturer and will be placing less units into service than other large manufacturers, so that will reduce the emissions as well. And the other point I want to make is that, among these 6 findings is that the applicant has evaluated curtailing operations in lieu of a variance. And so, Senator, you asked about that. I mean, of course, they considered whether or not they should just not serve this market, but it doesn't benefit the market, and it is a very big hardship on the distributors. I really can't emphasize that enough because it really is their livelihood that's at stake, and I think it was, in large part, their distributors calling, in particular US Air, calling to say, please help us out here. So I hope you will take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Reichart, your closing.
Thank you. Subject to compliance with the proposed conditions, the district is not opposed to the granting of this variance. Thank you.
Board members, I think we can make the findings as we did for the other 3 manufacturers with regard to this high-altitude market and this very narrow interim product variance that we're looking at today. And I think it's really important, once again, because this issue did come up at the governing board meeting, the last governing board meeting, and I think it's just very important that we really put on the record the fact that I don't know if the hearing board was necessarily the best way to handle this issue. I think it's very heartening that the governing board will be hearing this as it should in terms of looking at an overall exemption, because we have always been, we were concerned throughout this that we were ditching, essentially, or putting away a process that seemed to be working, and we heard a lot of deficiencies in the second hearing about that, but much more broad in terms of having all the manufacturers represented, all the distributors, all the installers represented, and so we spent a lot of time going through that, and also going through these proposed interim variance conditions to make sure that every sale is accounted for, to make sure that those mitigation fees that were in place before October 1st continued for this higher altitude market, to make sure that that there was no increase in price, so that even if we are essentially granting some kind of monopoly, oligopoly, I think is the word when you have more than one, that this market not suffer. And so I think it's come to the point where these findings can be made. They're the same as we made for the other manufacturers, and we're having the best interim relief, I think, that this hearing board could grant. So to go through them one at a time, there is clearly a violation with the manufacturer distribution at these high altitudes of non-compliant furnaces of Rule 1111 until there is an exemption that is granted, and currently there is none. So that first finding can clearly be made. Beyond reasonable control finding, we already discussed that, I think, in the first portion of this hearing, so we don't have to go through that. Again, the unreasonable taking of property goes all the way down the line. Most importantly, if these interim product variances are not granted, including this one. There's a hole in the market for those people who need the furnaces in high altitudes. Then going up the chain, the installers that install particular brands are impacted, or that install at all at high altitudes are heavily impacted. Then moving up, we heard today even more impact to the distributors that distribute those particular manufacturers and brands that that have not yet been accounted for in the other variances that we have granted. And then up into, if this continues long-term, up to the manufacturers, to Johnson Control, to incorporate to them losing distributors for those high on the in the high altitude markets overall. So I think we can make that finding with no problem. And I think that we have to weigh that tremendous impact on this high altitude market against what is a relatively very small impact on emissions. From Johnson Control today, we have heard 0.44 pounds of NOx per day. That's relatively small impact when we look at the huge impact on the high altitude market, so I can make that finding as well. Diligence in attempting to locate, research, or develop a product. This is one of those manufacturers that actually has a compliant ultra-low NOx furnace for the lower altitudes, in fact, up to 5,000 feet above sea level. And we heard the efforts that are being undertaken for the high altitude market, and I think we can make that finding, given what we've heard. And of course, quantifying any excess emissions will be taken care of through the proposed variance conditions for the interim variance. And those are all the findings we need to make. Any other thoughts on the findings? Mr. Balagopalan?
Yeah, just on the excess emission, I think and rightfully, the estimated emission was 0.0011 pound per day based on the staff report per furnace. I think what Johnson has done is they've multiplied, anticipated selling 400 units, and they're all operating during the period. That's how they came with the number of 0.44. So, but the baseline is the same that we assumed for all the other facilities.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very clear and helpful. Ms. Verdugo-Peralta, do you have to add?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think with this rule, we realized what the unintended impacts on the public were going to be, and that was also a driving force here. The fact that this rule ended up having a rippling effect across the industry for all of the pieces of the puzzle that went into this, it was, I think, beyond anybody's ability to foresee that. And for all of the reasons that have been presented today by you, I really do think that I can find for the 6 findings. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts? Okay. Oh, sorry.
I had my furnace serviced. It was a regular maintenance last Friday, and the gentleman who was installing it, who's going to be the owner soon, was actually confused because he was hearing different things from the manufacturer, and he actually went for training, and I won't mention which company, and they haven't updated anything on the interim variance or anything to communicate it down to the installers or contractors, what's going on.
So you're saying that has not occurred?
That has not occurred, at least to him, or, and his boss, he said it was using colorful language and was, based on the...
That's really good insight, and I see a lot of, I hear a lot of reaction to that, so I think that's good for the district to know, and I think it's very good for Johnson Controls to understand that that kind of communication probably needs to go down the chain. This is quite a long chain. And we're dealing with the top of the chain because we have to, in order to grant product variances, which was the only means by which this hearing board could take any approach to this problem. So thank you for that. Any other thoughts before I make a motion on this? Okay. So in the matter of Johnson Controls Inc., case number 6158-1, I move that we grant an interim product variance that will begin today, and we'll go through either the earlier of final compliance, and I would define that as if there were a far-reaching exemption that is adopted by the governing board on the 6th of December, and that would take care of any issues under this variance, or when this can be heard for a regular product variance, which we currently had scheduled for the 12th, but we will move now by agreement of both parties to the 18th of December, or for 90 days, whichever comes first.
I second.
Oh, wait.
Oh, sorry.
And it will, very quick, but we'll take you as the second. It's going to cover the furnaces, the non-compliant furnaces that are listed on page 4 of the petition, item number 5. And it will be for, as is in the proposed conditions, it will be for those non-compliant furnaces above 5,000 feet above sea level. And I further move that we incorporate those proposed interim variance, product variance conditions in Exhibit A. And excess emissions are anticipated to be in total 0.44 pounds of NOx per day. And the second, Ms. Verdugo Peralta, do you second that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Is there any discussion?
Number 8, condition 8, which is paying the fee by the
We have, I'll open it for the parties to tell us what they, is this a vestige of one of the other hearings, or is December 3rd an appropriate date?
Vestige from the other,
Okay.
sorry.
So do we want to make that then the 18th?
18th is fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, and we will, so with the sole change of condition number 8 will be changed from December 3rd to December 18th, 2019.
Thank you.
And Ms. Verdugo Peralta, you agree with that? I do. You accept that change, okay. Any other discussion on that motion? Okay. Senator, how do you vote? Dr. Bernstein, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Balagopalan, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Verdugo Peralta, how do you vote?
Aye.
I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
And we can't wait to see what happens on the 6th. Okay, board members, any other matters for today? Any other business? We are adjourned.